Chapter 42. If Lu Feng were to hear this, he would definitely be shocked. To be able to tell his warrior rank at a glance, and even his identity as a psychic, this old man was definitely not as simple as he looked. One had to know that back then. Even the principal, who was a warrior, did not see any problems at all. Legend had it that the principal had already reached the peak of the evolution stage of a warrior. He did not have the slightest feeling towards Lu Feng, but this old man could tell at a glance. One had to admit that this old man was terrifying. Hearing the old man's words, the young man smiled gently. "Uncle Ping, you're right. It's just 9. 9 stars of physical strength and a beginner psychic rank. It's really nothing. Perhaps it's already not bad among ordinary people, but in the eyes of existences at my level, such a person is not even qualified to be called a genius. However, just because he is not qualified to be on par with us now doesn't mean that he won't be in the future. Sir, have you already forgotten the cultivation method that I'm cultivating?" The young master's words made the old man slightly stunned. Then, for the first time, he looked solemnly in the direction Lu Feng had left. "If you say that, could it be that he also has?" The young master nodded gently, and a solemn expression appeared on his face for the first time. "His bloodline is very terrifying, but I don't know why it's still faintly in a sealed state. However, that seal has already begun to shatter, and I can feel that the seal won't last much longer. As long as there's an opportunity, it can completely shatter and completely release the power of his bloodline. Although I don't know what kind of bloodline it belongs to, I can clearly feel the terror of that bloodline. Moreover, the bloodline revealed in the cracks of his seal made me feel a trace of familiarity. Presumably, I must have seen this kind of bloodline before, and it left a deep impression in my heart. You should know what level of existence a bloodline that I can remember is." These words finally caused the old man's expression to change. He looked in the direction that Lu Feng had left with a look of disbelief. How is this possible? The bloodlines you remember are all at the same level as you, God's descendants. He actually has a bloodline of that level. This is unbelievable. This young master had the bloodline of a god. Although he wasn't the only one in the entire Federation, the number of people with such a bloodline was so small that they couldn't even be counted as a phoenix feather or a Chelan horn. That was truly rare, so rare that it was indescribable. Even if they were to include the geniuses they had hidden, the number would not be too high. But now, on this Gufang star, he actually encountered one so casually. This was truly astonishing. A moment later, the old man seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the young lord and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. When the young master saw this, he nodded gently. "I think he's probably here to answer the summons as well. Perhaps he even wants to enter that place to find the pill that can shatter the bloodline shackles." These words caused the old man's expression to change. At this moment, even though he was in existence of that level, his voice was trembling slightly. "You're talking about the bloodline shackles. Could it be that the seal in his body wasn't set up by his family to restrict him, but was he born with it? How is that possible? How can there still be bloodline shackles in this era?" At this moment, the young lord's expression was no longer solemn. Instead, it was solemn. This was a stark contrast to his previous gentle attitude. "It's the bloodline shackles. Uncle Ping, you don't usually care about these things, so perhaps you don't know, but I can tell you with certainty that there are still a few people in those families who possess the bloodline shackles. Some of them have even consumed the restriction-breaking pill passed down in ancient times and successfully released the power of their bloodline. Just because they haven't appeared doesn't mean they don't exist. I think those existences must be hiding in their families and quietly cultivating, waiting for an opportunity to reveal their fangs and shock the entire Federation." The shock on the old man's face faded, and after a moment, a solemn expression finally appeared on his face. "In that case, those existences will be your peerless enemies in the future." Hearing this, the young lord was no longer solemn. Instead, a confident look appeared on his face. In an instant, a terrifying will appeared around him. It was an invincible majesty, the nobility of an emperor. "They may become my enemies, but they definitely won't be my peerless enemies. I can do what my ancestor can do. Although they have the bloodline shackles, the power of their bloodline must have reached an unimaginable level. Once they release it, they can almost step into the ranks of the top peerless geniuses in the world. But so what? Even if my bloodline isn't as dense as theirs, don't forget who my ancestor is. How can my ancestor's existence be compared to an ordinary bloodline? After saying this, the young lord walked into the distance. Looking at his departing figure, a smile appeared on the old man's face. He nodded gently. So what if he has a thin bloodline? His greatness is something that no one can compare to. Which venerable in this era can compare to him? I hate the heavens for allowing me to live in the same world as the king. Soon, Lu Feng walked out of the boarding center and strolled on the street. At the moment, he was just walking aimlessly, but his expression was full of contemplation. He was still thinking about the identity of the young man from before. Soon, he stopped walking. At this moment, Lu Feng exhaled deeply. A solemn expression appeared on his face. What a terrifying young man. After cultivating the Origin Sutra and opening up the divine realm, my senses have far surpassed my level, but I still can't sense the presence of that young man. This kind of power is bound to be shocking. Come to think of it, he must be a genius, a true, peerless genius. He must be a genius nurtured by one of the super forces in the Federation. I just don't know which force he belongs to. If someone else had figured everything out, they would have laughed it off. After all, the peerless geniuses of the Federation level were too far away from them. Geniuses were divided into city-level geniuses, region-level geniuses, planet-level geniuses, starlight-level geniuses, nebula-level geniuses, and Federation-level geniuses. Geniuses of each level were also divided into ordinary geniuses, super geniuses, and peerless geniuses. After Lu Feng had shown his terrifying potential, he had been recognized as a Starlight-level super genius by the teachers of the Federal University. Although Starlight-level super geniuses were already terrifying, there was still a huge gap between them and Federation-level geniuses. Ordinary people might be like this. However, Lu Feng was different. He had the Great Devil True Body and the Origin Sutra, opened up the Divine Realm, and condensed the Origin Body. His future was destined to be extraordinary. His opponents wouldn't be ordinary geniuses either. Perhaps one day, when he ascended, his opponents would be all the super geniuses of the Federation, or even the peerless geniuses. In the future, only they would be his opponents. Today was the first time Lu Feng felt the terror of such geniuses. Although the young man didn't show anything, Lu Feng didn't know why, but he was certain that he was a Federation-level genius. He belonged to the top geniuses of the entire Federation. There was no basis, just a feeling. And this feeling was enough. Compared to those geniuses, I'm still very far away. Moreover, I've already lost too much at the starting point. Therefore, from now on, no matter what I encounter, I can't take a step back. Otherwise, I'll never be able to catch up to them. Since he was here, Lu Feng naturally wanted to take a good look around. After all, Gufang Star was one of the top 30 superplanets in the entire Federation. The population here was as high as tens of trillions. The prosperity here was far from what a third-class planet, like Cymbidium, could compare to. After thinking everything through, Lu Feng wandered on the main road and looked at the bustling city area. He sighed. Indeed, Gufang Star was too prosperous. Compared to here, Cymbidium is simply a small village. Even the planets I've been to before are far from comparable. After all, the largest life-sustaining planet I've been to is a second-class planet in the Federation. Cymbidium was a third-class planet. It belonged to the lowest class of life-sustaining planets in the Federation. In the Federation, there were 4 types of life-sustaining planets. One type was similar to Cymbidium, which had a population of less than 1 billion and a limited area. This type was a third-class planet. Third-class life-sustaining planets occupied a huge proportion in the Federation. However, the population on them didn't account for much of the total. After all, the population on them was limited. Further up were the larger life-sustaining planets that Lu Feng had been to. Generally, a life-sustaining planet with a population of more than 10 billion was a second-class life-sustaining planet. The area of this type of life-sustaining planet was dozens or even hundreds of times larger than that of an ordinary third-class life-sustaining planet. Only a life-sustaining planet with a population of more than 100 billion and a terrifyingly large area was called a first-class life-sustaining planet. Although the number of such life-sustaining planets was not very large, the population accounted for more than half of the entire Federation. After all, the population on a first-class life-sustaining planet was more than 100 times that of a third-class life-sustaining planet. Many powerful forces and gods' descendant families often owned a first-class life-sustaining planet. This was a symbol of identity and status, a testimony of glory and brilliance. Chapter 43. The life planets at the top of the Federation's hierarchy were the super life planets. There were only a little over 100 super life planets in the entire Federation. To become a super life planet, not only did it have to be large enough, but it also had to have a strict population limit. Unless the population exceeded 1 trillion, and the life planet had to have a god-level powerhouse overseeing it. Only then could it become a super life planet. Gufeng Star, which Lu Feng was standing on, was one of the top life planets. Its population was over 1 trillion, and its area was over 100,000 times that of a third-level life planet like the Cymbidium. In addition to the god-level powerhouse overseeing it, it could be ranked in the top 30 of the entire Federation. Even the foreign races had heard of Gufeng Star's existence. Its name was known throughout the entire galaxy. With a top existence and an unparalleled reputation, Gufeng Star's prosperity was naturally not something a normal life planet could compare to. Moreover, because there were no major factions here, and because of the Federation's strong control, Gufeng Star's stability and prosperity were almost comparable to the top 10 life planets. Lu Feng felt the incomparable prosperity, and his eyes were a little messy. After all, this was the first time he had seen such a huge city, and he could not remain calm. The famous buildings on the Cymbidium were like the most ordinary houses here and did not attract any attention at all. Any random building here had at least 100 stories. Super buildings with thousands or even thousands of stories were not uncommon here. The streets were extremely wide, and it was hard to find a car that was less than 200,000 on the road or flying in the air. After walking for an hour, Lu Feng saw no less than 100 super luxury cars worth tens of millions. He even saw a famous ICT series super sport car from the Federation. One had to know that the ICT group was an ancient brand that specialized in the production of suspension cars for over 5,000 years. Even the cheapest suspension car they produced was priced at over 10 million. Luxury sports cars like this were probably worth hundreds of millions, and without a certain status, it was impossible to buy one. Super luxury cars like this on the Cymbidium could be counted on one hand. But here, although they could not be seen everywhere, there were definitely a lot of them. Lu Feng couldn't help but sigh at the prosperity of Gufeng Star. After walking for a long time, Lu Feng felt hungry. However, after searching for a long time, Lu Feng still couldn't find a suitable hotel. If he was in the Cymbidium, he wouldn't care even if it was the most prosperous central hotel. But here, Lu Feng had no confidence in his heart. Even though his family was rich and could be considered a billionaire, he was still a rich man. However, after coming to Gufeng Star, Lu Feng understood that his money was nothing here. Perhaps they could be considered relatively wealthy, but they definitely couldn't be called rich. And those hotels were often measured in units of thousands of floors. The cost of such a luxurious building was definitely not a small sum. He still had more than 4 million on him. Even if it was just a big meal, it would be enough. However, Lu Feng wasn't a luxurious person. He still had a lot of things to do. How could he waste so much money on this? Finally, he saw a hotel called Joy, and Lu Feng walked in. Although this hotel was also extremely luxurious, it was better than the central hotel of the Cymbidium. But it was already considered very ordinary here. Walking into the front door of the hotel, someone walked up in an instant. It was a young girl with an exquisite appearance. Looking at the clothes on her body, Lu Feng knew that she was the hotel's waitress. Sure enough, after walking over, she smiled at Lu Feng and said, "Welcome to the Joy Hotel chain." "Hello." Lu Feng nodded his head gently. This was not the first time he had been subjected to such service, so he wasn't uncomfortable with such a scene. "Would you like to eat or stay?" Lu Feng didn't hesitate and replied directly, "Let's eat." The beautiful waitress nodded gently and then led Lu Feng directly to her room. After entering the room and looking at the luxurious decoration, Lu Feng sighed again, because he found that many of the decorations in this room were transported from some remote planets. These were all specialties of those planets, and there were no other places at all. Any hotel here could achieve such a level. Gufang Star was really worthy of being the 30th superplanet. The waitress took out the menu and handed it to Lu Feng. Lu Feng took it and opened it to take a look. In fact, before opening it, Lu Feng was also worried. He was afraid that the price of any dish on the menu would be astronomical. But after reading it, the worry in his heart finally disappeared, and it was replaced by a comfortable smile. Lu Feng found that although the price here was considered expensive, it was still within the range of his tolerance. The price here was a lot worse than the Central Hotel of the Cymbidium. Even if he picked some better dishes, the cost wouldn't be very high. After looking at the menu, Lu Feng hesitated, because he didn't know which of these dishes was better. After understanding that the price here wasn't very high, Lu Feng decided to enjoy the dishes here. He gently closed the menu. He looked at the waitress next to him, thought for a while, and said, "I don't know much about these dishes. Just give me a few of your hotel's specialties." Lu Feng has already seen the entire menu. The most expensive one here is only about 3,000 yuan. With this price, it doesn't matter if you order a few dishes. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress smiled and nodded, then turned around and walked out of the room. It has to be said that the high price brings high-end service efficiency. It didn't take more than 10 minutes. A few waiters came in with 7 plates. "Sir, these are our hotel's signature dishes. Because our hotel originated in the Fire Cloud Galaxy in the northern part of the Federation, our dishes are all northern flavors, but I don't know if they are to your taste." After saying this, the waiters politely bowed and left the room. Seeing that there was no one in the room, Lu Feng didn't feel restrained. These days, he was a bit too bored on the spacecraft. The food there was strictly limited. It was almost impossible to have any taste. But now, he could finally have a good meal. Lu Feng obviously wouldn't be polite. 7 dishes. If it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to finish it. But was Lu Feng an ordinary person? For him, there was no problem even if he ate a few more dishes. Not to mention that he was already starving. Therefore, the 7 dishes were quickly devoured by Lu Feng. Touching his slightly bloated belly, Lu Feng leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. After digesting a bit, he pressed a button on the table. Soon, a waitress walked over. "Sir, do you need any other service?" Lu Feng shook his head and said, "No, please pay the bill." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress opened a virtual screen and found Lu Feng's bill. "Sir, it's a total of 3,457 Federation coins." The price of 3,457 wasn't a small amount. On the Cymbidium, this was almost equivalent to the monthly income of an ordinary family member. But for Lu Feng, it really wasn't a lot. He took out the Federation payment card and handed it to the waitress. After swiping it, it was done. "Sir, do you want to stay here? Our hotel has a promotion recently. If you're a warrior, you can have a 20% discount. And if you're a psychic, you can enjoy a 50% discount. In the Federation, warriors and psychics could enjoy special treatment, no matter where they were. And on these super life planets, it was even more vivid. Therefore, when Lu Feng heard about such a promotion, he didn't have much doubt other than being a little tempted. "What's the price of your hotel?" On Gufang Star, Lu Feng didn't have any place to stay. He had originally planned to find a decent hotel to stay in. But after seeing the luxury, Lu Feng knew that the price of those hotels wouldn't be low. The price of this hotel chain wasn't too high, it was still within his acceptable range. Coupled with the discounts, Lu Feng was really tempted. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress still had a smile on her face. Because it's during the event, in addition to the normal discounts, Our hotel also provides some free packages. The rooms are divided into 3 classes. The third class is 1,000 Federation coins per day. The second class is 2,000 coins per day. The first class luxury suite is much more expensive. It costs 5,000 coins per day. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded gently. The price was indeed not expensive. Even on the Cymbidium, it was considered a normal price. Lu Feng knew that although he wouldn't stay here for long, it would at least be a week. Even the price of a luxurious suite was only 35,000 federal dollars for a week. Including his discount as a psychic, it would be less than 20,000 federal dollars a week. 20,000 coins really wasn't a lot. After a while, Lu Feng looked at the waitress and said, "Then give me a luxury suite. Also, I'm a beginner psychic. Beginner psychics should also be able to enjoy a discount." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress nodded quickly. "As long as you're a psychic, even if you're a beginner psychic. Now, I'll test your level. After confirming, you can go through the formalities." Chapter 44. After speaking, he took out an instrument and directly scanned Lu Feng in front of him. Lu Feng knew that this was a simplified spiritual power testing instrument. Although the accuracy was not high, it was fast. After just one scan, Lu Feng's spiritual power level was displayed. "Sir, after the test, your spiritual power has indeed reached the standard of 1 solidification. Please follow me to go through the procedures later." After speaking, he took Lu Feng to the front desk of the hotel to go through all the procedures. Then, he took Lu Feng to the luxurious suites on the top floor. After saying his thanks, Lu Feng walked into the room. Looking at the luxurious decorations around him, Lu Feng sighed softly. Luxurious decorations, 5,000 Federation coins a day, it's really not expensive. The decorations here are not worse than home. Lu Feng's home was a villa, and it was a luxurious villa. His parents were very good at enjoying themselves, and their taste was also very high. Lu Feng's villa was personally designed by his parents. He heard from his parents that the cost of building this villa was more than 9 figures. This number was undoubtedly very shocking. After all, Lu Feng's villa was not very large, but the cost was so high, which showed the luxury of their home. Although the layout of this place was still slightly inferior to his home, the difference wasn't that big. Even Lu Feng, who was influenced by his parents, was not very picky about the layout and furnishings here. Lying on the big bed made of dream oak, Lu Feng entered the Sky Channel to read the records about Gufang's star and his destination. Then he quickly fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the next day. Feeling the vitality in his body, Lu Feng smiled with satisfaction. Dream oak is really worthy of its name. Sleeping on it not only allows me to rest faster and better, but it also ensures that I'm full of energy after waking up. It seems that it's necessary to buy a dream oak bed when I go back. With a slight smile, Lu Feng got off the bed and hastily finished the set meal provided, then left the hotel. He planned to stay on Gufang Star for a week. Of course, it was only a week, and he was afraid that he wouldn't even be able to explore 1/1,000,000th of the entire Gufang Star. However, this time around, Lu Feng had come with a purpose. The city he chose to go to was not the largest in the entire Gufang Star. Although it wasn't the biggest, it was the most famous, because even the entire planet was named after this city. This city was called Gufang City. In the records of the Federation, Gufang City was the birthplace of the Gufang Star civilization. Although their civilization had spread throughout the entire Gufang Star, and even the surrounding planets and remote star regions had their tyrannical remnants, they were still able to leave behind their tyrannical legacy. However, the true center of the civilization on Gufang planet was in Gufang City. Not far from Gufang City was the destination of Lu Feng's trip. There were no amazing sights there, only monotonous buildings. And these buildings were pagodas. According to legend, this cluster of pagodas was the place of worship for this civilization, and it was also the place where all their secrets were hidden. Most of the ancient books and artifacts discovered by the Federation, as well as the records of the civilization, were obtained from this place. Therefore, one could choose not to go to the bustling cities on Gufang Star, but Gufeng City was a must, because from here, one could see the true essence of the Gufeng star civilization. He left the hotel and rented one of the hotel suspension cars. Lu Feng followed the directions on the map and flew directly toward the cluster of pagodas. He increased the speed to 700, but it still took him more than an hour to finally see the images of the pagodas. And after another half an hour, Lu Feng finally arrived at the edge of the place of worship. Looking at the terrifying pagodas that towered between heaven and earth, as if propping up the endless sky, Lu Feng took a deep breath. Big, it was really too big, too big. Compared to the buildings in the city center that had thousands of floors, these pagodas were much bigger. Tens of thousands of ancient Futu pagodas lay quietly in front of everyone's eyes, unusually peaceful and serene. Looking at these Futu pagodas, Lu Feng finally calmed down and walked slowly. Among them, the smallest Futu pagoda was nearly 1,000 floors tall, and the tallest Futu in the center was probably 100 times taller than normal. Every Futu pagoda occupied an area of tens of square kilometers. The area of the entire place of worship was much larger than that of a medium-sized city. As far as Lu Feng knew, a normal place of worship would not be too big. After all, a place of worship represented dignity and solemnity, and a place that was too big would only add some unnecessary trouble. But this place was completely different. Quietly sizing up the Futu pagodas around him and looking at their shapes, Lu Feng kept shaking his head. This was because until now, he had not seen a single familiar mark on these huge Futu pagodas. Back in his own mind space, Lu Feng did not know how long he had stayed there in order to condense the primitive body and open up the god's domain. During that time, he had been facing sky-piercing Futu day and night. Although he could not say that he remembered everything, he still remembered the general situation clearly. Although the Futu pagodas here were also huge in size, compared to the sky-piercing Futu he had seen in his own mind space, they were still far too inferior. Back then, when the sky-piercing Futu had appeared in front of him, he had felt that it had surpassed the sky-piercing Futu. The sky-piercing Futu was humanity's ultimate technology, which had been directly transformed into a star. The biggest Futu pagoda here was far less than a billionth of the sky-piercing Futu. Looking at the Futu pagodas one after another, Lu Feng did not stop walking. He kept shuttling back and forth. Nothing, still nothing, not a single one looks like it. Not a single one looks like it. He kept shaking his head and sighing. After spending the whole morning, Lu Feng still did not see a single Futu pagoda similar to the sky-piercing Futu. Although he had already thought of this, Lu Feng still felt a little disappointed at the moment. However, this disappointment was quickly hidden by him, because along the way, Lu Feng also noticed these Futu pagodas that appeared were not exactly the same. Although their shapes were the same, each of them had their own special patterns. Although the overall shape was similar, these patterns clearly differentiated them completely. In the afternoon, Lu Feng was already at full speed. He kept looking at all the Futu pagodas that he passed by, but he was disappointed again and again. Finally, just as he was about to reach the middle, Lu Feng abruptly stopped in his tracks. No, everything is wrong. These patterns seem to... For a moment, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. At this moment, he quickly ran to the front of the nearest Futu pagoda. Looking at the patterns on it, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a strange light. In the next moment, he arrived at another place. In this way, in the next hour, Lu Feng seemed to be crazy, constantly looking at the patterns on these Futu pagodas. Lu Feng's actions attracted the attention of the surrounding tourists, but after seeing Lu Feng's actions, no one said anything. Because at this moment, Lu Feng no longer restrained himself, and all the movements of a peak junior warrior burst out. Most of the people who came here were ordinary people. Seeing a peak junior warrior here a little crazy, they naturally wouldn't provoke him. After all, if they were hurt by such a madman, then the loss would outweigh the gain. For the performance of these people around him, Lu Feng acted as if he didn't see it. At this moment, he had fallen into a state of madness. Because at this moment, he finally found out. These Futu pagodas were not unrelated to the Futu pagodas in his mind space. On the contrary, the relationship between the two was too big, because the striations on these Buddhist pagoda were actually a part of the heaven-span pagoda striations. Tontian Futu was too big. Even though he had stayed there for a long time, Lu Feng had only seen a small part of it. So at the beginning, he didn't think of the connection between the two at all. By the time Lu Feng reached this place, he finally felt a sense of familiarity. And it was this familiarity that made him finally discover the secret of this place. Why is all of this? Could it be that the ancient Fang civilization and Tongtian Futu are really related? But how is this possible? Although the ancient Fang civilization is very scary and has a god of martial arts, they are really too weak compared to Tongtian Futu. Or they have seen Tongtian Futu before, or have a certain connection with Tongtian Futu. What is the truth of all of this? What is it? At this moment, Lu Feng was a little crazy. No one wanted to know the origin of Tongtian Futu more than him. After all, the horror that had surpassed the miracle existed in his mind space. That kind of thing was definitely not something that any civilization could create now. This was already the most terrifying and great relic that could not be replicated and described. As one of the three peak races in the entire central region of the universe, humans were the peak overlord race in the entire galaxy era. However, the unparalleled interstellar fortress Tianhua, created by the human race, was far from comparable to Tongtian Futu. In other words, there was no comparison between the two at all. If the human race was like this, it was even more impossible for other civilizations. Chapter 45. Lu Feng could not believe that the Tongtian Futu was created by the ancient civilization, because he knew that there was a huge secret hidden in the Tongtian Futu. Not to mention anything else, just the great demon true body and the primordial scripture. These two heaven-defying supreme techniques were enough to create an eternal civilization that surpassed the peak. But in the end, the ancient civilization clashed with another powerful civilization and was finally annihilated in the long river of history. If they had the power to create the Tongtian Futu, then in the entire universe, there was probably no race that could compete with them. Therefore, the ancient civilization might only have a certain connection with the Tongtian Futu, but they were definitely not its creator. What is the truth behind all this? At this moment, Lu Feng was really crazy. The ancient civilization had been annihilated. Everything about them was speculated by later human scientists based on those records. And the description of these Futu pagodas was just a kind of complicated pattern, a kind of worship of culture. Other than that, there was no other explanation. The truth about all this had long been completely annihilated in the passage of time. Even the existence of the entire human race could not solve it. So how could Lu Feng know everything? After thinking for a long time, he finally got one question after another. In desperation, Lu Feng could only sigh deeply. The next moment, he no longer paid attention to these Tongtian Futu, but ran quickly toward the largest Futu in the center. Vaguely, Lu Feng had a strange feeling that the Tongtian Futu in the center seemed to be inexplicably involved with all this. The distance between the center and the periphery was already hundreds of kilometers. If it were an ordinary person, they would not be able to finish it in a few days. But Lu Feng was different. He was a peak beginner warrior. With his full strength, his physical strength constantly erupted. It only took Lu Feng 3 hours to reach the center. After passing through the last huge pagoda, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the terrifying giant Futu pagoda. This place is temporarily sealed off. If you want to come, wait a few days. Just when Lu Feng wanted to get closer to take a closer look, he suddenly heard a voice. The moment he heard this voice, Lu Feng's muscles stiffened slightly, because Lu Feng found that, even after speaking, he still could not sense the source of the voice. This could only mean one thing. That was because the owner of the voice was an expert, a super expert who had surpassed his imagination. If this place is sealed off, why isn't it displayed on the information bulletin board? It was not easy to get here, so how could Lu Feng just leave? If it was an ordinary thing, Lu Feng would give up and wait for a period of time before coming here. But at this moment, his heart was filled with excitement. Because at the instant he arrived here, he finally saw it. He finally saw all the traces on the largest Buddha's pagoda. That was the condensation of all the surrounding images. Although compared to the countless complete images of Tontianfutu, these images were much worse. But in general, there was a trace of the miniature of Tontianfutu. Seeing this, Lu Feng had forgotten everything. For him, Tontianfutu was his foundation. The foundation for him to create miracles, transform his life, and sublimate his glory. Therefore, he was not willing to waste any time. Even after an inexplicable powerhouse spoke, he still did not want to waste any time. However, Lu Feng was not stupid. The biggest reason why he dared to face an unknown powerhouse like this was because this was Gufang's star. Gufang's star was not the other chaotic super life planets. This was one of the heavens for everyone, a place completely controlled by the Federation. Here, the Federation's laws were above everything, and no one dared to break the law here. Legend had it that there was once a powerhouse who had reached the peak of the martial arts world, almost one step away from becoming a god, a super existence who had achieved divine martial arts. Relying on his noble status and unparalleled strength, he once created a bloody case on Gufang's star. If it was on other planets, perhaps this would be the case. After all, the existence of a peak martial artist could no longer be restricted by ordinary technology and weapons. If one wanted to capture such a terrifying powerhouse, perhaps without sending out a fleet of cosmic warships, there was no hope at all. Just when everyone thought that everything was going to end like this, an accident happened. It was rumored that there was a Federation divine martial arts powerhouse on Gufang's star. This had always been a legend, but at that time, this legend was confirmed. Because he made a move, no one knew who he was because all they saw was a huge finger. Just like that, the terrifying finger descended from the sky and destroyed everything in its path. In an instant, the existence of a peak martial artist who thought he was invincible was completely smashed into a bloody mist, flying all over the sky. Since then, no one dared to violate the Federation's laws on Gufang's star. It was precisely because of this that Lu Feng, who was already a little crazy at this moment, actually lost his rationality and dared to directly refute that unknown powerhouse. As if he didn't expect that a mere ant like Lu Feng would dare to refute him like this, the mysterious powerhouse didn't speak immediately. Only after a long time did he slowly say, "This place has already been turned into a forbidden zone by us. If you want to force your way in, I think you won't be able to bear the price. So leave." Lu Feng was silent because at this moment he had gradually calmed down. Moreover, from this powerhouse's words, he heard a fact that he didn't want to hear. He said that then there was probably more than one powerhouse here. If it was just one, then perhaps because this was Gufang's star, Lu Feng wouldn't be very afraid. But if it was a group, then he really had to think carefully. After a while, Lu Feng let out a long sigh and finally retreated. It was really too irrational to force his way in like this. However, the moment Lu Feng turned to leave, a voice suddenly sounded. "Mr. Hua, let him in. He also has the qualifications to come in." Hearing this voice, Lu Feng's footsteps paused slightly. If it was an ordinary person, they might have already forgotten about it. But Lu Feng still remembered, because the owner of this voice was too deeply engraved in his memory. He was the person he met in the center of the spaceship previously. That young man, whom Lu Feng recognized as a peerless opponent in the future, belonged to the Federation's top genius. Hearing the young man's words, the mysterious powerhouse seemed to be silent. After a long time, he finally said, "Mr. Luo, it's not that I don't want to give you face. It's just that this person doesn't seem to have anything to do with opening that place. He doesn't even have a guardian by his side. Such a person, does he have the qualifications?" Lu Feng didn't speak. He had no right to speak at this moment. At this moment, whether it was Mr. Luo or the mysterious powerhouse called Mr. Hua, they were far from what he could compete with. And the meaning of their words made Lu Feng feel confused. In response to Mr. Hua's refutation, only laughter was the answer, incomparably indifferent laughter. Mr. Hua, are you doubting me? If I say he can, he can. Perhaps many people can go against my will, but it seems that you don't have the qualifications to do so. Domineering. Such domineering words. Such a domineering person. At this moment, Lu Feng could only think of the word domineering. Lu Feng didn't know how powerful the mysterious powerhouse was, but he had his own calculations. To be able to remain undetected until now, the mysterious powerhouse was definitely a martialist, and not an ordinary martialist. Back then, his principal was also a martialist. It was even rumored that he was at the peak of the evolution stage. But he couldn't feel such a mysterious difference from the principal. Therefore, Lu Feng was certain that this mysterious powerhouse was at least a martialist who had surpassed the evolution stage. He was most likely a fusion stage martialist. But in the face of such a powerful martialist, Mr. Luo was actually so domineering. He gave people a feeling of a terrifying will and majesty that couldn't be violated and resisted. Just as Lu Feng thought that Mr. Hua was going to get angry, an unexpected voice was heard. "Come in." These words made Lu Feng reveal a trace of surprise. He could feel the strong unwillingness and resentment in the tone, but besides these, the biggest thing was a kind of fear, a kind of incomparably strong fear. He was actually afraid of Mr. Luo. Lu Feng continued to remain silent. He didn't move. This was because Lu Feng was hesitating. From the previous conversation, he heard some problems, such as the seal, the lifting of the seal, and so on. Connecting this to his current position, Lu Feng was really conflicted. He could vaguely guess that these people seemed to want to open a place. And this place was very likely to be related to the ancient sacrifice of Gufang Star and the huge Futu Pagoda. He was now only a peak beginner martialist. Although he was confident that he could reach the threshold of an advanced martialist and defeat an intermediate martialist with the help of his martial arts buff and combat power, he was still confident. But so what if he was an advanced martialist? In front of these people who had surpassed the beginner evolution stage, he was still an ant. If they wanted to kill him, they didn't even need to move their hands. Just a thought and manifested martial arts could easily kill him thousands of times. Without a doubt, it was very dangerous to enter this place without any confidence. Logically speaking, he should leave. But at this moment, Lu Feng was hesitating, because from the conversation, he also heard a kind of opportunity. Chapter 46. Lu Feng believed that there were many people inside, and some of them were probably real powerhouses. They had joined forces to open the seal here. Lu Feng didn't care about what was inside or what he could get. All he needed was an answer that could answer all the questions in his heart. If he came alone, it would be really difficult to solve anything. If he was with these powerhouses, he might really be able to figure out some of the doubts in his heart. Clenching his teeth, Lu Feng finally dashed into the palace. Gradually, the full appearance of the ancient and huge Futu Pagoda began to appear. The surface was densely engraved with various ancient patterns. The walls were made of a material that Lu Feng had never seen before. These walls gave Lu Feng the feeling that they didn't exist. They seemed to be just like rocks, but Lu Feng felt a sense of movement from these so-called rocks, which was something that no other material had. Among the natural patterns on the surface, Lu Feng had seen most of them on the heavenly Futu in his mind space. However, there were also a few that he had never seen before, or that he had seen them but couldn't recall them. However, these didn't matter, because Lu Feng was sure that the biggest Futu Pagoda in front of him was definitely related to the heavenly Futu. After all, he had specially checked those patterns before, but he didn't find any such records. Lu Feng speculated that it was very likely that this huge Futu Pagoda was built based on the terrifying heavenly Futu in his mind space. His speed continued to increase, and finally, he was about to reach the Futu Pagoda. In front of him, in addition to the huge Futu Pagoda that was getting clearer and clearer, Lu Feng finally saw some figures. There were hundreds of figures. At this moment, they were standing in front of the Futu Pagoda, seemingly looking at something. After running for a few minutes, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of these people. Looking at these figures in front of him, Lu Feng's eyes twitched slightly. Among the hundreds of people in front of him, there were 20 young people. These young people all exuded the same kind of aura. It was a kind of lawless and fearsome majesty. Lu Feng's heart raced. He knew that these were all geniuses, true peerless geniuses. Although they hadn't displayed any power, the feeling they gave Lu Feng was that they were a kind of embryonic overlord existence. There were only a few super geniuses in the entire Federation, but now there were so many of them. No wonder they were so domineering and directly sealed off this place. A super genius represented a huge force. After all, it was impossible to nurture a Federation-level genius without a huge amount of resources. The young genius called Young Master Luo, whom Lu Feng had met before, was currently standing quietly among these young geniuses. Although he was just as calm, his existence was like that of an emperor. Billions of living beings looked up to him and worshipped him devoutly. This scene confirmed Lu Feng's guess. Young Master Luo should be a peerless genius of the Federation level. He should be the strongest genius in the entire Federation. Apart from these geniuses, the rest of the people were either old or middle-aged people. They were just as calm, but Lu Feng knew that these people were definitely extremely terrifying powerhouses. Their strength was most likely on par with that mysterious master named Mr. Hua, who had spoken earlier. These people should be the so-called protectors of these geniuses. Young Master Luo smiled faintly when he saw Lu Feng's silent expression. Then, he walked forward to everyone's surprise. He looked at Lu Feng and spoke in a friendly manner that no one had ever seen before. "I knew you would come. I just don't know which family you're from. You don't have any protectors." This was young Master Luo's confusion. It was also everyone's confusion. Young Master Luo cultivated the legacy of that peerless existence. He had his peerless bloodline. He could see a lot of things that even pinnacle warriors couldn't see. However, just because he could do it didn't mean that others could do it. He was confused about Lu Feng's identity. After all, the existence of bloodline shackles was the treasure of those bloodline divine descendants. Once they took the limit-breaking pill, they might have a chance to break the seal of the bloodline shackles and soar to the sky. They would become a super genius of the Federation, or even a peerless genius. He sensed Lu Feng's condition and discovered that Lu Feng had already begun to shatter the shackles in his body. Even without the aid of any medicine, it would probably take a few years for him to complete his rebirth. He would walk out of the endless shackles and shock the entire galaxy. Such a genius actually didn't have any protectors. This was unbelievable. Unlike young Master Luo, the others were confused about Lu Feng himself. This was because in their eyes, everything about Lu Feng could be seen clearly. It was impossible to hide even the slightest detail. They couldn't sense any bloodline fluctuation from Lu Feng's body. This proved that Lu Feng couldn't be a divine descendant. Moreover, his strength was too weak. Although a 17-year-old peak beginner warrior and peak beginner psychic was considered a genius among ordinary people. However, in their eyes, such a talent was no different from a mortal. They didn't understand why the famous young Master Luo would ask such a person to participate. Therefore, when they heard young Master Luo speak, everyone's attention shifted to him. As for Lu Feng, he remained silent in the face of young Master Luo's question. He didn't speak. This was because he didn't want to reveal anything. He didn't know why, but when he faced young Master Luo, he always felt uncomfortable. Although he could feel his kindness, Lu Feng didn't know why, but he didn't like his existence. This wasn't a physical rejection, but a kind of annoyance deep in his mind. Looking at Lu Feng's appearance, young Master Luo seemed to have thought of something. He smiled and shook his head gently, then slowly said, "Looks like this time you ran away from your family. Since you don't want to say, then forget it. You can say it when you want to in the future." At this moment, young Master Luo's words shocked everyone. Even the few peerless geniuses who could faintly compete with young Master Luo's aura were the same. Since when was young Master Luo so easy to talk to in their eyes? However, these people quickly recovered. At this moment, there was only calmness and indifference. Although most people were like this, it didn't mean that everyone was like this. After a while, a genius looked at young Master Luo and suddenly revealed a cold smile. Young Master Luo, previously, we agreed to let him in because you said that he was qualified to enter this place. However, this ordinary person has neither strength nor bloodline. He doesn't even want to reveal his identity. His words weren't complete, but the rest didn't need to be said. This was because everyone understood that the person who spoke wanted young Master Luo to give everyone an explanation. Young Master Luo didn't turn around. He was still smiling at Lu Feng. However, when he heard that provocative voice, a cold glint flashed across his eyes. He reached out and patted Lu Feng's shoulder lightly. This scene surprised many people because the young Master Luo today was really different from his usual self. Looking at Lu Feng, Mr. Luo still had a smile on his face as he spoke. In a while, you'll be by my side. Be careful. The people here are much stronger than you. After saying this, young Master Luo glanced sideways at an old man and continued. Uncle Ping, take care of him when the time comes. Don't let him get hurt. Young Master Luo finally turned around when he saw Lu Feng's slightly stunned expression. He looked at the provocative prodigy, and his expression finally changed. At this moment, the gentle smile he had on Lu Feng disappeared. It was replaced by a kind of arrogance and nobility. Wang Tiangang, you want an explanation, right? Wang Tiangang was still full of mockery when he heard young Master Luo's words. He didn't say anything and just looked at young Master Luo coldly. Young Master Luo gently shook his head when he saw Wang Tiangang's expression. He spoke again with a cold smile. It's not impossible for you to explain. However, what right do you have to ask me to explain to you? Domineering and incomparably domineering. At this moment, Lu Feng was even more aware of young Master Luo's domineering attitude. It was the most arrogant kind of domineering attitude that would never lower its head in front of anyone. Young Master Luo's words finally caused a slight ripple in the expressionless faces of the prodigies. It was a kind of slight fluctuation. However, these colors quickly disappeared without a trace. They didn't say anything. They just looked at Wang Tiangang and young Master Luo quietly. At this moment, Wang Tiangang no longer had that mocking expression on his face. His face was filled with humiliation and resentment. However, these expressions quickly disappeared as well. There is a river in the east, with the word Luo as its head. The Luo produces books, and the river produces pictures. When combined, they are called the Luo River, which symbolizes wisdom and mystery. In the eastern star region of the Federation, the Luo River is the true water of the gods. Countless gods have been nourished and nurtured by it. Young Master Luo, with the name Luo, has dominated the Federation for a long time. Your name has shaken the entire galaxy. Even the exceptional prodigies of the other races have been subdued by you. Legend has it that you have the talent to match up to your ancestor, the greatest existence in human history. Even in this golden era, where kings among gods are destined to be born, you are still dazzling and make people tremble in admiration. You're only 27 years old, but people call you the Luo Emperor. I just don't know if this is true or not. Chapter 47. Lu Feng was silent. However, his eyes flashed with a trace of shock. Even he knew about the existence of the Luo River. The reputation of the Luo River was too legendary, too great. Legend had it that there was a special power in the water. Every once in a while, a special essence would condense. This essence contained a mysterious substance. If an ordinary martial artist at the peak of the martial arts consumed it, there was a high chance that they would break through to become a god among martial artists, a divine martial artist. The Luo River was also known as the Water of the Gods, the River of the Gods. However, Lu Feng did not expect that the Luo in this young Master Luo's name was derived from the Luo River. He was even called the Luo Emperor by others. This form of address was simply too shocking. Young Master Luo smiled slightly. He looked at Wang Tiangshan with a cold gaze, but there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. The current eldest son of the divine descendant family, the super genius of the Federation. Perhaps you're not too bad. However, if you want to challenge me and see my true strength, you're still not qualified. If you want to see me in my strongest state, perhaps your master will have to come in person. When Wang Tiangshan heard the word master, his face flushed slightly, but he forcefully suppressed it. My sworn brother is so peerless. Is he someone you can compare to? I really don't know why there are people who place you on the same level as them. You're the strongest among the younger generation, and only the strongest have the right to be called an emperor. I think you're not worthy. Gradually, the conflict began to intensify. Seeing this scene, the geniuses kept retreating. They understood that young Master Luo's faction and Wang Tiangshan's faction had been mortal enemies since the generation of their ancestors. The two great families had been at odds for countless years, and even their subordinate factions had been fighting both openly and covertly. Wang Tiangshan was the eldest son of the Wang family, and also the number one genius. The Wang family was the number one family under that faction. In that faction, Wang Tiangshan was the number two genius, and in everyone's eyes, he was indeed qualified to challenge young Master Luo. The Luo Emperor of the East Water, the Rong Emperor of the West Land, is the battle between the seven most outstanding, peerless geniuses of the Federation's younger generation and two of the seven titled emperors about to begin. Lu Feng stood to the side, watching the geniuses smile and listening to their conversations. This was the first time he had heard of the existence of the seven emperors, the top geniuses of the Federation. Young Master Luo was still looking at Wang Tiangang with a sneer. At this moment, Wang Tiangshan suddenly laughed. He took out a crystal from his clothes and opened it. In an instant, the crystals collided rapidly. In less than a tenth of a second, it had expanded into a towering existence. Looking at the 4-meter-tall object, Lu Feng took a deep breath. His expression was one of disbelief. This thing belonged to someone else, so how could he not recognize it? The towering existence that had appeared was a mecha. It was a mecha that was filled with strange decorations. It was different from the mecha Lu Feng had seen. This mecha was very special. Its entire body was made of an unknown metal, and there were countless glowing patterns on it. Perhaps other people wouldn't know what these patterns represented. However, Lu Feng understood. What shocked him was the existence of these patterns. The patterns on the sky-piercing footu that he had seen in his mind space were trillions of times more complicated than the ones on this mecha. Lu Feng knew that the veined patterns provided a terrifying boost to the mecha, something that made the mecha even more terrifying than it already was. Young Master Luo finally showed a hint of abnormality when he saw this mecha. After sizing it up, he nodded his head gently. I've long heard that the Wang family's research on mecha has reached the pinnacle of perfection. I didn't expect that you would actually reach this step, merging technology and the crafting techniques of the fourth era into one. Although this kind of unimaginable idea has been proposed and even succeeded a long time ago, it only existed on huge cosmic battleships and interstellar fortresses. However, now I know that you have actually successfully merged these with the mecha. Not bad, really not bad. To be able to reach this step, you would need at least a god-level inscription master to have a chance of succeeding. The 3 consecutive not bad from the proud and honorable young Master Luo was enough to show how extraordinary and terrifying the mecha in front of him was. No wonder you dare to challenge me. It turns out that you relied on this brand new mecha. Hearing this, Wang Tiantian didn't deny it. He nodded his head gently. His previous expression had already receded. Now, there was a kind of fortitude and caution. The Sky War God is the strongest mecha that the Wang family has successfully created after decades of research. Although it is only a mecha, it is impossible to control it without the strength of a spiritual psychic. I'm not afraid to tell you that, under the control of the spiritual psychic, the sky war god, could even completely destroy a sub-life-bearing planet. In an instant, Lu Feng sucked in a breath of cold air. Although a sub-life-bearing planet was much smaller than a level 3 life-bearing planet, it was still a life-bearing planet after all. Its huge volume was at least 1/10 the size of a cymbidium. Lu Feng believed that a universal-level warship could destroy a sub-life-bearing planet. After all, universal-level warships were the most advanced technological essence of the Federation's warships. A warship with such terrifying firepower was enough to be called a firepower monster. Even powerhouses of other races would have a headache if they saw it. Apart from deterrent weapons like interstellar fortresses, universal-level warships were already the pinnacle of human conventional weaponry. But now, a mecha could achieve the terrifying destruction that only universal-level warships could achieve. This was really too terrifying and unimaginable. Hearing this, young Master Luo's expression finally turned serious. Although he was conceited and had exceptional talent and incomparable strength, he wasn't a stupid idiot. To be able to unleash the destructive power of a universal-level warship, it was definitely extremely terrifying power. Even if he was one of the top 7 princes of the younger generation, he had to be careful when facing such a thing. The next moment, Wang Tiantian walked to the side of the mecha and entered it in an instant. At that moment, the patterns on the sky war god started to fill up slowly. There was a dazzling brilliance surging on it. Terrifying, majestic, and indescribable invincible majesty slowly flowed out of the mecha. It was also at this moment that the surrounding geniuses and guardians slowly gathered together with a solemn look on their faces. They also had to be careful in the face of such power. Holy Emperor, although I can't unleash 1/10 of the sky war god's power and can't achieve the realm of being invincible below the god level, I'm still able to unleash it. But with my power as an advanced psychic, I can already unleash its true destructive power. I want to see if you're qualified to be called one of the 7 princes together with my sworn brother, if you lose to me. Finally, it started to move. Lu Feng vaguely felt an apocalyptic power surging. It seemed like it would descend in the next moment and completely destroy everything, turning everything into nothingness. This kind of power was too terrifying and indescribable. In the face of such power, everything that Lu Feng was so proud of turned into a piece of paper. It seemed like it would shatter and disappear with a light touch. There was an endless bitter smile on his face. For the first time, Lu Feng had the urge to regret his choice. He knew that once the two of them started fighting, not to mention the ancient ritual community, even Ancient Square City and the area around Ancient Square City would suffer the most severe destruction. Almost everything within a radius of tens of millions of miles would be completely destroyed. It would become a testimony to their ultimate confrontation. If he had known that such a collision would happen, he really wouldn't have come. Just as he thought that he was going to be completely crushed by this terrifying aura, all the pressure and majesty around him suddenly disappeared without a trace. Lu Feng looked at the old man who appeared beside him with a grateful expression. This old man was the person who Lu Feng had seen beside young Master Luo in the center of the spaceship. He knew that this person should be young Master Luo's protector. He obeyed Master Luo's will and stood guard by Lu Feng's side at this critical moment, preventing Lu Feng from perishing before the battle even began. Lu Feng looked at young Master Luo. He realized that when facing the mecha-shaped cosmic battleship, there was only a hint of caution in the sky wargod's eyes. There was no trace of fear. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood what was going on and was deeply shocked. He knew that even though the sky war god was so terrifying, he could only make young Master Luo feel a little threatened. Unfortunately, that was all there was to it. It couldn't even give him the slightest bit of pressure. His aura slowly began to rise. In just an instant, young Master Luo's aura actually broke through the obstruction of heaven and earth, causing the entire sky to slowly shatter. Deep cracks began to appear in some places, as if the dome within a radius of over 1,000 miles was slowly shattering like a crystal. Chaotic aura appeared from those shattered areas and poured in. Lu Feng knew that this wasn't some strange phenomenon. It was truly shattering. This was an extreme form of destruction. Young Master Luo's aura actually began to tear space apart. Terrifying. Incomparably terrifying. A man and a mecha looked at each other. Endless power began to bloom, as if everything would be annihilated in the next moment. However, just as everyone was preparing to temporarily retreat, just as everyone thought that the destruction couldn't be stopped, but everything had changed. Chapter 48. Giant Hand. What kind of terrifying giant hand was that? In Lu Feng's eyes, that giant hand was indescribable. In front of it, the sky war god that was previously shining with light was now dull and colorless. That power that could pierce through the sky with just its aura instantly became a thing of the past. With one hand, it covered the sky as if a world had descended, as if it could destroy a civilization and an era. God descended, God. This was the power of God. Only a God-level existence could have such invincible power and create such a terrifying miracle that could shake the infinite galaxy with just one person's strength. At the moment when the collision was about to happen, God finally appeared. As the giant hand descended, the heavenly war god that was once so proud of being able to slay gods and vanquish demons was crushed to the ground. The complex patterns engraved on his body were dazzling at this moment, completely illuminating the entire sky. Countless powerful and terrifying weapons were all used at this moment. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood what this mecha-shaped universe-level battleship meant. It meant that it was just a mecha, but the terrifying firepower it produced was comparable to the maximum output of a universe-level battleship. Terrifying. Such a mecha could no longer be described with the word terrifying. Such a powerful force caused the entire Earth to faintly crack. If it was placed in any other place, or under the maximum output of such power, it could really easily destroy a quasi-life-bearing planet. If there were no restrictions, even a third-grade life-bearing planet like Cymbidium could be destroyed, causing it to eventually disintegrate and dissipate into the universe. However, this resistance was ultimately futile. In front of God, any resistance was a joke. If they wanted to punish the gods, they would have to rely on the ultimate deterrence of the interstellar fortresses or another god, compared to Wang Shangtian, who was wearing the sky war god. Prince Luo, who was respected as one of the 7 strongest emperors of the younger generation, was obviously much more powerful. Facing the pressure of the giant hand, a dazzling light flashed in his eyes. Endless majesty erupted, and behind him, an ancient emperor vaguely appeared. That was a peerless and unique vision, sweeping through everything in the world and reigning supreme in the universe. Lu Feng understood that this was a unique ability that only warriors had. Martial Path Incarnation. Once the Martial Path Incarnation was completed, it would be able to manifest a complete object. And the power of this object was enough to destroy everything. Even an interstellar fortress would have to retreat temporarily when faced with this terrifying Martial Path Incarnation. Looking at the majesty of that invincible king, Lu Feng knew that this emperor-like existence must belong to the most peerless and terrifying extreme divine ability among all the Martial Path incarnations. Although it wasn't complete, it was just an illusory existence. However, he was displaying the domineering and invincible power of holding up the heavens with one hand and destroying the heavens. Fusing with all of Luo Gongzi's will and power at this moment, it was raised to the limit. Young Master Luo is going all out. That is his invincible strength, the most powerful supreme technique that allows him to unleash a terrifying increase of 10 times even in the perfect stage. King's Execution. A supreme technique. It could be said to be an existence similar to a forbidden technique. It was a terrifying and supreme technique of slaughter that surpassed any other technique. Moreover, The level of this supreme technique was at least at the pinnacle of the star rank. It might even be a supreme technique that surpassed the star rank. Luo Gongzi's strength was already earth-shattering. Now that it had undergone an increase of at least 10 times, no one could imagine what kind of level it would reach. The invincible incarnation, the great emperor giant figure, seemed to have fused with Luo Gongzi. They turned into one and went against the heavens. They broke through all obstacles and shackles and faced the unparalleled giant palm head-on. The palm attacked the two of them at the same time. In the face of this invincible technique, Wang Tian, who had even used an interstellar-level destructive weapon, didn't have the slightest ability to resist. However, under this palm, Luo Gongzi unleashed an even more terrifying combat power. After an instant, a terrifying collision was heard. The entire world seemed to be shaking. Endless dusk arrived. The surrounding space was filled with the illusion of the end of the world. At this moment, Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the sky. However, the scene that he saw stunned him, because in his eyes, the sky seemed to no longer exist. The terrifying attack, the invincible killing power, directly annihilated everything. Luo Gongzi's strength wasn't something that ordinary people could imagine. Otherwise, he wouldn't be respected as one of the 7 most talented young emperors of the younger generation. At this moment, after the increase of the supreme law, his strength was truly at the peak of the younger generation. The giant palm from before had completely disappeared. That was a supreme attack that could even kill the sky. Although the giant palm was terrifying, it wasn't the real body of that god. Therefore, Luo Gongzi's shocking attack defeated the god. Heaven and earth were in a state of solemnity. Those arrogant geniuses looked at the sky. Luo Gongzi's clothes were slightly disheveled and his aura was low, but he still persisted in floating in midair and swallowing medicine. Their eyes flashed with a kind of indescribable complexity. There was a kind of vague fear that even they didn't feel. Wang Tian walked out from the Heaven War God. His whole body was exhausted. With the help of the Heaven War God, he wasn't completely destroyed by the giant palm. He only collapsed because of the excessive outburst of spiritual power. At the last critical moment, he also used the Supreme Law. It was the Supreme Law that belonged to a psychic master. At the last moment, he reached the level of psychic master and completely unleashed the full power of the Heaven War God. Even so, even though the power of the Heaven War God was enough to easily crush a sublife planet, it still couldn't resist the will of the god and was instantly suppressed. If it weren't for those mysterious lines and the terrifying materials of the Heaven War God, he would have been completely crushed. He originally thought that since he was so severely injured, Luo Gongzi wouldn't be any better. However, at the very last moment, he saw that shocking and invincible attack. At this moment, he finally understood the meaning of the 7 most powerful young emperors of the younger generation. Silence, incomparable silence. Everyone's gaze was fluctuating as they stared at the sky. Although they were shocked by Luo Gongzi's strength, these people understood even more how terrifying the power of a god was. Since his casual attack had been disrupted, he had no choice. Then the owner of the giant palm, the divine martial existence guarding Gufang's star, would also appear. Wangzhe, what a nostalgic name. You are his descendant, right? Hearing the voice in the sky, Luo Gongzi was neither servile nor overbearing. He just nodded lightly. For a long time, there was no sound reverberating. Just when everyone was at a loss, the previous sound rang out in the sky again. It's a pity that your Wangzhu is still not good enough. Compared to the Wangzhu of your elder who used the divine state, you are still far too weak. If anyone else heard this, they would definitely voice out their objection. After all, a supreme technique performed by a divine spirit was naturally many times more powerful than a supreme technique performed by a perfect stage martial artist. However, this time, Luo Gongzi didn't have any strange emotions. Once again, he nodded gently, his expression filled with reverence. The elder you're talking about should be my uncle, the great divine martial expert with the title God Slayer. In my family, there are a few elders who can use the Wangzhu. However, they're only stronger than me in terms of the difference in strength. Only my uncle, who is extremely talented and can make billions of races tremble, can use the Wangju, which is the strongest supreme law. He is the only one who can surpass me in terms of comprehension. God's Slayer, yes. Back then, the few of us were the strongest of the younger generation, the young emperor 40 years ago. Unfortunately, from the beginning until now, he has always been the strongest among us, the first emperor of our generation. However, all these years, I haven't heard any news about him. Could it be that he has already fallen? In the voice, there was a strong sense of longing and regret, and even a little reverence. The voice rang out in the endless space, causing everyone to be affected by his emotions and go deep into an inexplicable memory. Feeling these changes, Lu Feng's expression changed slightly. He knew that this wasn't done intentionally by the divine martial existence, but because he was unknowingly emitting a kind of unconscious feeling that affected him. Divine martial existence, as expected of a supreme being who is titled as a god. Their every word and action can easily affect everyone's emotions. This is just too terrifying. Hearing the divine martial existence's words, Lord Luo's expression finally became somewhat respectful. He thought that he had already guessed the identity of the person opposite him. You must be the ancient orchid god. Your existence, when I was very young, I once heard the elders of my family mention your existence. I didn't expect the guardian of Gufang's star to be you. My uncle left the family for some reason when I was young. He didn't fall, and has been living well all this time. Thank you for your concern. Another period of silence. It was uncomfortable, oppressive, and endless fear. Finally, the voice rang out again. Once, the five of us were ranked as the strongest in the Federation. Even among the thousands of races in the galaxy, we were considered to be the pinnacle of geniuses. However, he was undeniably the strongest emperor. Now, after all these years of settling down, we have all found our own direction and are gradually opening up our paths. I can feel that my Tao is gradually appearing. Go back and tell him that when I complete my Tao of origin, it will be the time for me to challenge him. I hope that when the time comes, he won't disappoint me. Chapter 49. After saying that, the owner of the voice left. Although no one could see anything, they could feel that the owner of the voice, the noble and supreme God, had really left. Everyone was extremely silent. These people dared to cause such a big commotion here because they had nothing to fear. Not to mention anything else, just the power behind young Master Luo was incomparably terrifying. It was one of the most powerful forces in the entire Federation. In their own galaxy, they had established their own country. Even the Federation government didn't dare to do anything to them. Although the Federation had a god, young Master Luo's family also had a god. In fact, they had quite a few gods, and it was very likely that they had already become true gods. Therefore, as long as they didn't go too far and didn't commit a heinous crime, the Federation government didn't want to be too strict with the descendants of these terrifying forces. The giant hand, just now, was already considered as punishment. These people also understood that the god just wanted to punish them. He didn't intend to kill anyone. If he really wanted to kill these people, the attack just now would have been made by the god himself. At that time, unless it was another god, no one would be able to escape. The scene of destruction in the sky was quickly restored. This was all thanks to the god. At the divine martial realm, one could already carry out the evolution of the world. With a wave of their hands, they had the power of creation. Wherever their thoughts went, everything would tremble in submission. They could create living beings. Therefore, although the divine martial realm still had the title of martial realm, when people called them divine martial realm, they would habitually remove the mortal title and directly call them gods. The damage on the ground was also slowly healing. Lu Feng could feel an indescribable power slowly repairing the ground. At this moment, he was even more curious and mysterious about the ancient Feng civilization's place of worship. Young Master Luo slowly descended from the sky. His face was pale. Lu Feng knew that this was the aftereffect of using the supreme law. It was already inconceivable that he could still be in such a state after using the perfect supreme law. This made Lu Feng feel admiration. In an instant, Uncle Ping, who was beside Lu Feng, disappeared. He appeared beside young Master Luo and supported him. Out of nowhere, he took out a bottle of crystal-clear medicine and fed it to young Master Luo. "Young Master, why are you risking your life? He must know who you are. Even if you just stand here and do nothing, he won't be able to do anything to you." Uncle Ping looked at young Master Luo with heartache and sighed slightly. Hearing this, child Luo smiled. Although his pale complexion didn't fade, although he still had a pained expression on his face. However, his arrogance could not be concealed. "I'm a king's bloodline. No matter what I face, the king's glory will never be lost. Even if I know that there is an insurmountable gap in front of me, I will still, not taking a step back." Everyone was silent. The Holy Emperor was one of the 7 most powerful emperors of the younger generation. However, among the 7 young emperors, his bloodline density was not the highest. However, his strength was enough to be ranked among the strongest. Among the 7 emperors, only he and Emperor Rong had clashed before. However, 4 of the remaining 5 emperors had clearly admitted that they were inferior to the Holy Emperor and Emperor Rong. The remaining, the most mysterious demon emperor, had also said that he could not suppress them. This was enough. This was enough to prove the Holy Emperor's strength. The reason why he could be so outstanding in this era of the Human Federation was not only because of his peerless talent, but also because of the strength of his bloodline. They were all the most powerful descendants of gods, but the density of his bloodline could not be compared to the other emperors. Compared to Emperor Rome, it was even worse. However, the existence of his bloodline was incomparable to the others. This was because he had inherited the legacy of the greatest king. Time passed slowly. Young Master Luo was recovering continuously. However, even Lu Feng could tell that he would not be able to recover completely in such a short time. Soon, countless mechanical roars could be heard from the distant horizon. An endless number of spaceships and mechas rushed towards them from the sky. In an instant, they occupied all the positions in the sky. Lu Feng was speechless when he saw these people. These people were the Federation's army. They were even a regular army that could fight across galaxies. Although not all of them had appeared, not even 1% of them had appeared. However, the appearance of such an organization in a region was still very shocking. Lu Feng looked at the surrounding Federation geniuses who were extremely silent. However, they were not afraid at all. They just quietly watched this military organization that could easily destroy a level 3 life planet. After a long time, a huge battleship over 10 kilometers long flew out from the army. This was a quasi-advanced battleship. It was at the center of everything. Soon, the battleship's main door opened. A person wearing the uniform of a first-rank officer walked out. He looked at the hundreds of people standing quietly below him and finally sighed deeply. He said slowly, "I know that all of you are the inheritors of powerful forces in the Federation. However, please take note that this is Gufang Planet, a restricted area for the various large organizations of the Federation. If you act too presumptuously, then we will no longer care about the organizations behind you and forcefully take action." If an ordinary person heard this, they would be frightened. However, none of the people present were ordinary. The forces behind them were at least at the level of a galaxy. In the eyes of ordinary people, such an army might be a towering existence that they would never dare to offend. However, to them, it was really nothing. In their eyes, if it was the general army of the Federation group that shook the entire galaxy, they might be afraid. However, these were inferior existences to them. They were really nothing. Of course, even if they thought so, these people would not say it out loud. After all, the one standing on Gufang Planet was a god. The Gulen god whose name had spread through the galaxy decades ago. These people were not Luo Gongzi, who dared to go against the god. We understand. Just now, We were impulsive and disturbed everyone. In the end, it was Luo Gongzi who spoke. At this moment, after he used a supreme method and displayed his shocking strength, no one dared to provoke him. Even Wang Tian, who got up with difficulty and was protected by several guardians, didn't have any temper. Hearing this, the first-rank general nodded gently. After trying to show a smile, he finally turned around and walked into the battleship. A few moments later, the terrifying fleet disappeared as quickly as it came. The Gulen god appeared just now. Isn't it unnecessary for them to come? Seeing the disappearing figure, a genius finally couldn't help but speak. However, no one responded to his words, because these people weren't idiots. After thinking for a while, they already understood the key point. Although the Gulen god appeared, however, he only represented himself. He was just a guardian, not a representative of the Federation's law. Only these people were. Therefore, after he appeared, these people still braced themselves and came. After all, they were the Federation's army stationed here. When encountering such a situation, they had to show up and express their gratitude. Soon, these people's eyes focused on Luo Gongzi, whose complexion had recovered a little. They didn't say anything. However, even Lu Feng knew what they meant. Seeing these people's gazes, Luo Gongzi smiled gently. He looked at the terrifying tall Futu pagoda, and his expression began to become more dignified. This time, so many geniuses from the Federation have gathered here. Their purpose must be clear. Our elders have been here countless times before, but they never managed to open the door in front of us. This time, we're going to try. We're going to try something that our ancestors couldn't do. The Su family's young master obtained an ancient artifact from an ancient ruin, and this artifact seems to have an inexplicable connection with the ancient Feng clan. After deciphering it, we found that with it, we might be able to open the door of the central sacrificial ground and enter here. Everyone was aware of this. After all, before they came here, they had already received the news. However, before entering here, we have to destroy the seals set by that existence. However, it was very difficult to destroy such a seal with pure strength alone. This seal was a supreme seal set up by the person who had discovered this place and answered many of the questions in this place. To break the seal, we have to have a bloodline. Only the bloodline power of us, the descendants of the gods, can break his seal. Other than that, there's no other way. Endless silence. All the geniuses looked at Luo Gongzi. This was because they knew that if they wanted to break the seal, they had to follow Luo Gongzi's lead. After all, the seals set by that existence could only be broken by an even stronger bloodline power. Although everyone present was a divine descendant, the level of their bloodline power was slightly lower. Only Luo Gongzi's bloodline had such power. Since none of you have any objections, let's begin. After saying this, Luo Gongzi looked at Uncle Ping next to him, then at the guardians behind the geniuses. Finally, he nodded lightly. Guardians, I'll have to trouble you with the outer seal. Hearing this, the guardians didn't say anything. All of them took a step forward and arrived at the foot of the huge ancient Buddha pagoda. Chapter 50. The next moment, countless forces surged. Nearly half of the guardians summoned their own personal mechas or small battleships. At this moment, whether it was the battleships, mechas, or the terrifying martial artists, they all went all out. The huge power instantly broke through the clouds, causing the entire earth to tremble. Lu Feng narrowed his eyes slightly. At this moment, his heart was constantly shaken. When he was in the Cymbidium, the strongest person Lu Feng saw was their school's principal, the legendary martial artist who was already at the peak of the evolution period. However, he now realized that a martial artist in the evolution period was really nothing. This was because none of the guardians or geniuses that appeared so far were lower than the evolution period. At the very least, they were super strong in the upheaval period or ability users at the same level as psychics. Close to 100 upheaval or even perfect stage martial artists and psychics attacked at the same time. Such a terrifying power was definitely enough to shake the world, causing all the brilliance to be overshadowed. Gradually, all the forces were boiling. Under Lu Feng's horrified gaze, all the forces actually condensed at one point and suddenly rushed toward the huge Futu pagoda in the center. The full force attack of a martial artist in the upheaval period was definitely earth-shattering. Although the Futu pagoda in front of him was huge, it was not enough in the face of the full force attack of a martial artist in the upheaval period. Perhaps even a city would be crushed and turned into nothingness under the attack of such a strong person. At this moment, it was the strongest killing move of nearly 100 of these terrifying strong people. Lu Feng believed that with such a condensed attack, perhaps even a level 3 life planet would become a thing of the past. In the next moment, the earth-shattering scene that Lu Feng expected did not appear. In this endless, violent turbulence of destruction, the huge Futu pagoda seemed to be the only eternity between heaven and earth. Layers of ripples surged, but the Futu pagoda did not suffer any damage. Finally, when the most powerful force was released, the ripples were like a mirror, shattering into pieces. At this moment, the powerful martial artists and psychics stopped what they were doing. The mechas disappeared, the battleships disappeared, and everyone calmly appeared in front of everyone. They nodded lightly at their respective young masters and Luo Gongzi. Luo Gongzi smiled slightly and walked to the front. Looking at the Futu pagoda that seemed to have lost its protective power, there was a faint trace of excitement in his expression. If a god were to make a move, I'm afraid it would only take a light blow to completely destroy the outer protective power. Unfortunately, we can't ask the god in our family to make a move here, but it's okay now. The little protective forces deployed by the federal government have already disappeared. What's left is ours. After saying that, Luo Gongzi's face finally, Luo Gongzi. Activate your bloodline power. Open the seal, Luo Gongzi. Out Luo Gongzi, Luo Gongzi, Gongzi, Luo Gongzi, Gongzi, Luo Gongzi. Luo Gongzi, Luo Gongzi Z, Luo Gongzi. You should be aware of the things that might be inside. Ever since this civilization was discovered, there have only been 3 people who have truly entered it. Those 3 people's identities are the noblest in the entire universe. Perhaps they don't care about those things, but they're incomparably precious to us. Therefore, whether we can obtain an opportunity or not depends on this. Luo Gongzi raised his arm slightly. At this moment, the 20 young geniuses behind him did the same. They all had solemn expressions, as if they were undergoing some kind of solemn ceremony. As Lu Feng watched everything unfold, he was filled with endless doubts. Luo Gongzi raised his arm and walked to Lu Feng's side. He said softly, "I'll now impart the bloodline activation method to you. Although your bloodline is still sealed, it's still possible to activate some of your bloodline power. When the time comes, attack together with us and destroy a hole in the seal. If you can open it and enter, I promise that you'll have a share of the things inside." After he finished speaking, an inexplicable will appeared. It was projected directly into Lu Feng's mind when he was unprepared. Lu Feng didn't react, or perhaps he didn't even have time to react when a strange cultivation method appeared in his mind. He knew that this was the bloodline activation method that Luo Gongzi was talking about. This kind of cultivation method was just a method of triggering. It wasn't really that profound. With Lu Feng's talent, he understood it in a few moments. The next moment, he raised his arms and closed his eyes. Luo Gongzi's eyes flashed when he saw this. He knew that those who were able to possess bloodline shackles were all geniuses. Even if their bloodline hadn't awakened, the peerless talent that was bestowed by their bloodline wouldn't be destroyed. However, this talent wasn't completely unleashed. The amazement they possessed was at most among ordinary people. However, this young man in front of him actually comprehended the bloodline activation method in an instant. This was truly shocking. One had to know that even Luo Gongzi had only used a little bit of time back then. At that time, he had already awakened his own bloodline. It's hard to imagine. He was already so stunning before the bloodline shackles were shattered. Once he fully awakens, how terrifying will he be? I'm afraid that there will be an 8th emperor among the 7 emperors, after muttering to himself in a low voice. Luo Gongzi finally immersed all of his willpower into activating his bloodline. Soon, all sorts of mysteries and willpower appeared. They condensed on the arms of these geniuses. It was formless and formless, but it was always there. It was real. However, the mysteries that they activated weren't exactly the same. The main difference between them was the magnitude of their power and majesty. Luo Gongzi's bloodline power wasn't the densest among everyone present, but it was the most majestic. The majesty of an invincible king overlooking everything made the bloodline power condensed by those existences feel like they were retreating. Looking at this, the Guardians nodded slightly, as expected of his descendant. Even though his bloodline power isn't very dense, his majesty and realm far surpass any other existence. Hateful heaven gave us the Emperor's order to live in the same world as the Emperor. Since ancient times, among the billions of races, the greatest Emperor. How terrifying. All eyes were focused on Luo Gongzi's palm. At this moment, even their young master couldn't attract the attention of these peerless powerhouses. Regardless of whether it was a psychic or a warrior, they were all paying close attention to the bloodline power condensing of the ancient First Emperor. No, how was that possible? Look, just as everyone was paying attention, a psychic's expression suddenly changed. He stretched out his finger and pointed in a direction. His face was filled with disbelief. Many of the Guardians were awakened. They all looked in the direction that the psychic pointed at. However, after a glance, they all had the same expression. What kind of bloodline does he have? Why can't I feel the power of this bloodline? How domineering. Even under the pressure of Luo Gongzi's bloodline, he didn't show the slightest bit of fear. He even gave me the feeling that he's on an extremely noble level, not inferior to Luo Gongzi in the slightest. The Guardians were looking in the direction that Lu Feng was standing at the back, trying to condense his bloodline power. At this moment, Lu Feng was already immersed in his own mind. Endless waves of energy were constantly emitted as his body and mind settled down. This was a power that surpassed any imagination. It was emitted from Lu Feng's body, but it was as if the bloodline power of heaven and earth was being displayed together. In the beginning, although he had followed the cultivation method to activate the bloodline power in his body, he still hadn't succeeded after trying for a long time. Lu Feng knew that he did have the power of a bloodline, and his bloodline should be very noble. Otherwise, the so-called relatives and fathers he had met back then wouldn't have said such things. However, after trying for a long time, he still didn't feel anything. Just as he thought that his bloodline was extremely thin and that he couldn't activate it and was about to give up, Lu Feng suddenly felt a strange sensation. It was born from his own blood and existed in every corner of his body. They existed and struggled incomparably, as if they were trying to break through the obstacles of some region and appear in his body. However, at the moment when the breakthrough was at its strongest, another kind of inexplicable shackle appeared. It was powerful, terrifying, and indescribable. Lu Feng didn't know why there were such shackles in his body. He didn't understand how they came about. These shackles seemed to have been there since he was born, as if they had always been there and sealed his bloodline. The power of a bloodline was terrifying, truly incomparably terrifying. Although he only felt it for a moment, Lu Feng could clearly feel that it was an incomparably terrifying and powerful bloodline. It was an invincible bloodline that, once it appeared, would make time pale in comparison and make heaven and earth tremble. However, even with such a terrifying and peerless bloodline, it still couldn't break through the final obstacle. However, although he couldn't break through the shackles, Lu Feng still felt a trace of power flowing out. He felt that there seemed to be a small gap in the seal, and it was through this small gap that some of the power from his sealed bloodline slowly appeared and began to gather in his hand. Chapter 51. Everyone looked at Lu Feng. They finally understood why Luo Gongzi let Lu Feng in. That's a sealed bloodline. The aura seeping out from a seal is simply impossible to sense which bloodline's power belongs to. But there's one thing we can be sure of. This bloodline is extremely terrifying. It should be one of the most powerful bloodlines below the king bloodline. This is a genius, a terrifying genius. His bloodline is sealed because his bloodline is too strong. It was sealed by the elders of his family, so that he can safely grow until he can bear the power of the bloodline. Once he releases all of his bloodline, I'm afraid there will be another super genius in the Federation. Finally, at the last moment, Lu Feng released all of his bloodline. An extremely illusory power condensed in his palm. That was the fusion power of his bloodline. This illusory color was obviously much weaker than the others. But no one underestimated him, because this was the bloodline power condensed through a crack in the seal. Everyone opened their eyes and looked at Lu Feng with slight surprise. At this moment, these geniuses also understood Luo Gongzi's plan. They all looked at Luo Gongzi at the same time. Luo Gongzi didn't care about these people's gazes. He didn't care at all, because at this moment, his gaze was also focused on Lu Feng. No one saw Luo Gongzi's slightly trembling mouth and his unusually deep and excited gaze. How is this possible? Although it was only a trace of bloodline power, he could still feel it. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Luo Gongzi looked at Lu Feng with a strange gaze. But soon, this trace of emotion was deeply hidden by him. He regained his original expression. He looked at the terrifyingly huge Futu pagoda again. I don't need to say anything else. You should know the rest. Inject your bloodline power into it and temporarily open a trace of the seal. We'll use this time to use the ancient artifact to try to open the ancient Feng clan's sacrificial ground. Let's attack together. In the next moment, Mr. Luo walked to the front and placed his bloodline-powered arm on the Futu pagoda. Soon after, the other geniuses did the same. Similarly, he placed his arm on the pagoda. Seeing these people's actions, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and did the same. In an instant, it was really just an instant. Lu Feng felt that he had entered a completely new zone. There was endless darkness there. There was no sky, no earth. There was only endless darkness and darkness. However, after suddenly appearing in such a strange space, Lu Feng wasn't shocked at all. This was because there were more than 20 figures beside him. They were those geniuses. Young Master Luo stood in front of everyone with a serious look in his eyes. In a moment, the seal set up by that existence will appear. We don't have the slightest ability to resist him. Fortunately, we have the bloodline. Use our bloodline to restrain him temporarily. The guardians outside will try their best to break a layer of the seal so that we can temporarily open this place. In a moment, don't make a move. Use your bloodline power to resist the surge of the seal's power. Do you understand? These geniuses had either heard of the method to break the seal, or they had known about it for a long time. They nodded their heads lightly. Young Master Luo didn't intend to tell them. At the moment, he was only paying attention to Lu Feng. Remember, if you can't resist it, come to my side. However, if you force yourself too much, your bloodline power won't be fully released. You can't withstand too much right now. For some reason, Lu Feng felt that young Master Luo's tone had changed a lot compared to before. However, Lu Feng couldn't tell what kind of change it was. He was sure that young Master Luo didn't have any ill intentions toward him back then. At the moment, there seemed to be a sense of closeness to him. Lu Feng did not try to be brave. The virtual version of him nodded gently. All right, it's coming out. Everyone became extremely cautious when they heard young Master Luo's words. At that moment, in a distant location, the endless chaotic and dark space seemed to be torn apart by a powerful force. A crack opened with a loud bang. An ancient, desolate, and invincible aura slowly emerged from the crack. In an instant, another instant, the crack was completely torn to its greatest extent. At the next moment, its body finally descended into the pitch-black space. That is. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were as wide as they could be. He stared at the thing in front of him in disbelief. How could it be him? Could it be that the existence that sealed this place back then was him? Lu Feng looked at the solemn faces of the people in front of him, unable to believe what he was seeing. However, those geniuses seemed to have known all along. They didn't look shocked at all. They just quietly stared at the terrifying object in front of them that covered the sky. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He wanted to calm down, but he realized that it was all in vain. That was because the thing in front of him was too terrifying. He couldn't believe it. I really didn't expect that the existence that sealed this place was actually that existence. In front of him, the gigantic object was incomparably close. As far as the eye could see, there were countless blood-red images. Those images had all sorts of appearances. However, they all had one thing in common. That was because these images were all images of living beings. Thousands of images of all sorts of living beings were deeply engraved on that gigantic object. And that object was a tombstone of unknown, terrifying size. Almost everyone in the Federation knew about the existence of this tombstone. That was because in the history of the Federation that they were familiar with, the significance of this tombstone was incomparably shocking. It belonged to one of the top beliefs of the Federation. Its name was the Yellow Spring Tombstone. This wasn't a strange existence that was born and nurtured by the heavens and earth, nor was it the crystallization of the Federation's technology, nor was it a relic from a distant era. It was the martial arts incarnation of a great existence. It was the condensation of his martial arts will. That existence's name was the Divine King of Yellow Spring. In more than 10,000 years of human history, there were countless peerless powerhouses that were born. However, those that could be endlessly praised were only a few dozen people. These people were the most powerful existence in the Federation and even the entire universe. The Divine King. The Divine King of Yellow Spring was a great divine king in human history more than 4,000 years ago. Perhaps his strength wasn't the strongest, but his reputation was one of the most resounding. Even if the peak powerhouses of the other races heard this name, they would be incomparably terrified and shocked. That was because this name only represented one meaning: slaughter. Limitless slaughter. Legend had it that every time the Divine King of Yellow Spring killed a god, their soul, and what would be suppressed and absorbed by the Yellow Spring Tombstone. In the end, they would turn into the appearance of those creatures before they died, forever remaining on the tombstone. And on the Yellow Spring Tombstone in front of them, thousands of images flashed. This could only mean one thing. The Divine King of Yellow Spring had once killed thousands of gods. This was too terrifying. In that era, the Divine King of Yellow Spring was also known as the Divine King of Slaughter. Legend had it that for the sake of the human race's overlord, he once killed countless people, causing countless peak races of that era to tremble and submit. Even the Divine King of the other races of the same era deeply feared his existence. I didn't expect that the seal here was actually set up by him. No wonder it took so many geniuses to activate the power of their bloodlines to barely resist it. The Divine King of Yellow Spring was an invincible powerhouse who stood at the peak of the Divine King. His strength was one of the strongest among all the Divine Kings of all races since ancient times. Even after more than 4,000 years, he's still not someone below the Divine King can provoke. If not for the fact that so many divine bloodlines were activated at the same time, I'm afraid we wouldn't even have the slightest chance of stopping it. While he was thinking, the Yellow Spring Tombstone had already descended. Powerful. It was simply too powerful. Although it was only a part of the seal and only a trace of the power of the Yellow Spring Tombstone, the Divine King of Yellow Spring's martial Tao avatar, the extent of its power was indescribable. Compared to the giant hand formed by the ancient god earlier, this Yellow Spring Tombstone's power was simply countless times greater. Even if it was only a trace of the power of the projection, it was enough to kill any god. With such a powerful force, perhaps even a level 2 life-sustaining planet would be instantly shattered. It's hard to imagine just how powerful the Divine King is. No wonder the legends that describe the Divine Kings say that they can shatter a super-sustaining planet with a wave of their arms. Just their strength alone is enough to contend with those black holes that are considered forbidden areas in the universe. Finally, the crushing power descended. At this moment, Lu Feng also followed the example of those people, fusing the power of their bloodlines into his virtual body and enveloping himself. They knew that if they relied on their strength, perhaps even more than 20 gods would not be able to withstand the Yellow Spring Tombstone's phantom. They could only rely on the power of their bloodlines. The moment it covered his entire body, Lu Feng felt an indescribably terrifying pressure descend from the heavens. That formidable strength appeared from all angles, born from all possible time and space. It was as if it wanted to completely shatter him. Chapter 52. However, just as Lu Feng thought that his soul was about to shatter, a large part of the terrifying pressure on his body suddenly disappeared. Although it was still as terrifying and indescribable, it was still within Lu Feng's tolerance. He looked at the countless rays of light surrounding his body and immediately understood. The Yellow Springs Divine King was a divine king, but this Yellow Springs monument was ultimately only his martial Tao incarnation and could not be compared to his main body. Furthermore, what appeared here was only a small part of the Yellow Springs monument's shadow. Its power was probably not even 1/10,000th of its peak power. Those who could enter here were all God's descendants. Their bloodline power came directly from their ancestors. Even if it could not compare to the Yellow Springs monument's shadow, it was enough to withstand. The pressure was still increasing. However, just as Lu Feng thought that it would never end, all the pressure suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, he realized that he had left the pitch-black space. Looking at the familiar surroundings, Lu Feng realized that he had returned to his main body. Everything he saw before had completely disappeared. Turning around, Lu Feng finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the Guardians had stopped. He knew that the seal had been temporarily opened. "Thank you, Guardians, for your help." Young Master Luo looked at the Guardians who seemed to have just fought a great battle and expressed his gratitude. He turned around and faced a young existence beside him and said again, "Young Master Su, take out that artifact. We've come this far, we can finally try." Hearing young Master Luo's words, that young Master Su nodded lightly and then took out a disc-like object from somewhere. It was plain and unremarkable. However, the patterns carved on it seemed to be telling of its extraordinariness and uniqueness. "My family obtained this artifact from the ruins of an ancient civilization in a distant galaxy. After years of research, we discovered that it seems to be closely related to this sacrificial ground. My family's elders discovered that this artifact is very likely related to opening this sacrificial ground. Whether it's true or not, we can still give it a try. After all, once we really open this sacrificial ground, the things inside will definitely make our trip worthwhile." Hearing this, everyone gently nodded their heads. Indeed, there were a few other pinnacle beings besides the Divine King of Yellow Springs who had entered this place, and they were all universe supreme beings at the level of the Divine King. Things that the Divine King did not want didn't mean that they were useless. After all, in the eyes of the Divine King, there were very few things in this universe that could be used. Then let's give it a try. After he finished speaking, all of them looked nervously at young Master Su, who was walking towards the Buddha's pagoda. This time, Lu Feng did the same. However, he was stunned by what he saw, because at this moment, the Buddha's pagoda in his eyes had already changed completely. Everything he had seen before had disappeared. Those ancient mottled walls had become a thing of the past. Now, the part in his eyes was incomparably sparkling and translucent. It was a sparkling and translucent wall made of an unknown material. On this wall, there was something that looked like a door that was flickering with fluorescent light. And young Master Su was walking toward that door. Seeing Lu Feng's strange expression, young Master Luo smiled slightly. He walked to Lu Feng's side and said, You must be wondering why this sacrificial ground has become like this. Actually, this is the true appearance of the sacrificial ground. Originally, its entire body was made of this sparkling and translucent light. But later, it was sealed by the divine king of Yellow Springs and became what it is now. Lu Feng nodded lightly. Actually, I've always been puzzled. Since there are gods in your family, why don't you ask them to open this sacrificial ground directly? I think that once this huge pagoda loses the seal of the divine king of Yellow Springs, it shouldn't be a problem for one or a few gods to break the entrance. This was Lu Feng's question. In his opinion, the greatest reliance of this Futu pagoda was the seal of the divine king of Yellow Springs outside. And once those powerhouses appeared and used the power of their bloodline to break the seal for a short period of time like today, would the power of the gods not be enough to open this sacrificial ground? Hearing Lu Feng's words, young Master Luo only smiled slightly. There was a kind of kindness in this smile. Originally, this was all top secret. Even in those families, only the core disciples were allowed to know about it. However, it doesn't matter if I tell you now. Speaking of this, young Master Luo glanced at Lu Feng again. However, the meaning contained in this gaze confused Lu Feng even more. Do you still remember the problems you discovered when you first arrived here yesterday? When he first arrived yesterday at the center of the spaceship, Lu Feng had been puzzled by the uniqueness of Gufang's star. It was also at that time that he first met young Master Luo. Of course, Lu Feng remembered everything. He nodded. Actually, in this sacrificial ground, the tens of thousands of pagodas around it aren't considered sacrificial grounds. They exist for the sake of this pagoda. The biggest function of those pagodas is to nurture. They are constantly nurturing a special kind of power that is integrated into this pagoda in the center. Actually, these patterns that you see are all formed after those pagodas were nurtured. They are imprinted on this largest pagoda through an inexplicable bond. Hearing this, Lu Feng revealed a look of shock. Through countless pagodas, these mysterious patterns were nurtured, and through a special method, these patterns were engraved on this pagoda. All of this was a little too inconceivable. However, what young Master Luo said next made Lu Feng completely dumbfounded. Gufang's star doesn't have any gravity. You've noticed this too. The super life planets with normal gravity in the Federation also have gravity. In the entire Federation, only this place doesn't have any gravity at all. The reason for all of this is because Gufang's star isn't a real planet. Its real identity should be weapon. Lu Feng was stunned. He was completely dumbfounded. He looked at young Master Luo with disbelief in his eyes. Weapon? How could it be a weapon? The largest weapon that appeared on the Sky Network was only comparable to a city. As for that artifact, it had appeared a few eras ago. Power was terrifying, almost comparable to a weapon like a star fortress. However, young Master Luo said that this super life planet that was 100,000 times the size of the Cymbidium was also a weapon. Was there such a huge weapon in this universe? Seeing Lu Feng's expression, young Master Luo smiled gently. When I first heard about this, I was also very surprised. However, this is the truth. But it's a pity that this artifact is too big and unimaginable. Even the Divine King didn't use its power. Therefore, in the end, it has always existed, but only as a secret in the hearts of the top figures in the Federation. And this sacrificial ground is actually a part of this weapon. If you want to forcefully open this sacrificial ground, then you have to be the enemy of the entire old Orchid Star, and you have to collide with this terrifying and mysterious weapon. With that kind of power, I don't think anyone can do it. Lu Feng was silent. He was extremely silent. If what young Master Luo said was true, then perhaps no one could use violence to open this huge Futu pagoda in the center. Even a god, 100 or 1,000 gods, couldn't do it. Even the Divine King didn't have such power. All right, success or failure. We'll see the results soon. Now let's wait and see. Young Master Luo didn't look at Lu Feng anymore. His eyes were slightly excited as he looked at young Master Su, who was trying his best to open the door. However, He didn't see the strange light in Lu Feng's eyes when he turned around. It still doesn't work. Everyone's face was filled with dejection. They had seen the result. Until the last moment, the door's pattern didn't change at all. It was still in its original state, without any change. At this moment, although no one said anything, everyone could see the deep disappointment on their faces. After a deep sigh, young Master Luo slowly said, "It seems that we still failed this time. If you don't reach the Divine King's level, you can't enter this place." Everyone was extremely silent. The thing inside could definitely make countless people go crazy, but they were destined to have no fate with it. The Divine King is an overlord of an era, the strongest existence that can look down on billions of races in the universe. They stand in the infinite starry sky. They symbolize peerless invincibility. In the vast universe, there's nothing that can go against them. After becoming the supreme Divine King, what else in the universe is worth their attention? Moreover, it's not that easy to reach that level of existence. One of the geniuses murmured to himself. His words were heard by everyone. They were also extremely silent. That's right. What kind of existence was the Divine King? How could they reach him just by thinking about it? Although everyone present was a genius, and some were even geniuses of the Federation level. However, no one was willing to believe that a Divine King could be born among them. Even the 7 sovereigns of the younger generation had almost no possibility of that happening. The 5 sovereigns of the previous generation were overflowing with talent, but they were all completely suppressed in the face of the provocation of the peerless geniuses of thousands of races. And the Godslayer is even more stunning. He's only 27 years old, but he's already reached the godly state, looking down on almost all the peerless geniuses of billions of races. But even so, he's just an existence that people hope to break the shackles of the Divine King. Can people like us be born? Chapter 53. In the end, everyone left. They knew that this trip had been in vain. Even so, they didn't feel too regretful. After all, they had already thought of the outcome before coming. Moreover, being able to see one of the 7 emperors, the Luo Emperor, unleash his full power made this trip worthwhile. He watched as the crowd gradually left. Lu Feng stood in the same spot without moving an inch. He quietly watched the Futu Pagoda reveal its true appearance. Beside him, Mr. Luo didn't leave either. He came to Lu Feng's side and looked at him with a strange expression. He slowly said, "Are you very unwilling to accept this?" After Lu Feng heard this, he didn't nod or shake his head. It was impossible to guess what he was thinking. Seeing this, young Master Luo chuckled and shook his head slightly. There are many such ruins in the universe. Although in terms of rarity, perhaps the Gufang Star Sacrificial Land should belong to the top ranks. Since it's the top, it's not easy to obtain. This time, just take it as a chance to broaden your horizons. By the way, I still don't know your name. This time, Lu Feng didn't hide it, although he didn't get anything out of it. However, it was all thanks to Mr. Luo that he was able to come here and experience so much. Lu Feng would naturally remember this person who was indebted to him. "My name is Lu Feng." Mr. Luo's eyes flashed with a trace of excitement when he heard this. However, this trace of excitement was completely suppressed in an instant. He quietly looked at Lu Feng and suddenly laughed. "Lu Feng, right? That's a very good name. A very good name." After saying this, Mr. Luo looked at Lu Feng and moved his mouth slightly, as if he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he didn't say anything. He just gently patted Lu Feng's shoulder again. Then, he took out something that looked like a crystal from his body and handed it to Lu Feng. "This is my family's substitute crystal. If you encounter any danger that you can't resist, then crush it. The moment it shatters, it will produce a powerful force that will help you once. Moreover, once the experts of my family sense the shattering of the crystal, they will do their best to save you." Looking at the crystal in front of him, Lu Feng recovered from his thoughts for the first time. He looked at young Master Luo in front of him. He did not understand why young Master Luo would give this to him. You don't need to know the reason. One day, you will understand. All right, I have to leave too. I hope that the next time we meet, you will no longer be the same person." After saying this, young Master Luo turned around and left. Looking at Luo Gongzi's disappearing figure, a trace of confusion flashed across Lu Feng's eyes. Lu Feng was not an idiot. He naturally knew the weight of the crystals in his hands. The family's experts that young Master Luo mentioned were definitely real experts. After all, he was already at the peak of martial arts. Since he called them experts, those existences must be gods. Gods could tear the void apart with a wave of their hand. Once they moved forward at full speed, their speed would be 10 times or even 100 times faster than the fastest interstellar fast ships. And with this crystal, it was almost equivalent to having another life. Such a valuable item, it must have been given to young Master Luo because of his exceptional talent. But why would he give such a precious item to someone he had only met once? Lu Feng really could not understand. "Young Master, that's a substitute crystal. You must know that there are only a few such crystals in the family. Every single one of them was refined by the clan's elders over a long period of time. I remember that you didn't give it to young Miss when she wanted it back then. But now, why are you—" Young Master Luo reached out and interrupted Uncle Ping, who was about to say something. A trace of melancholy appeared on his face. "Uncle Ping, let's not talk about this anymore. I didn't give it to Azi back then because I was afraid that she would use it to venture into dangerous places. So, I didn't give it to her. But this person is different. After all, he is alone outside. If he really encounters danger, this thing can help him once. As for the reason, you don't have to ask anymore. There will be a day when you will understand." After saying this, young Master Luo walked into the distance. Uncle Ping stood in place and seemed to be thinking about something. But after a moment, he seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed slightly. "Lu Feng, his surname is... He actually has the surname Lu." Everyone had already left. In the entire ancient Futu pagoda, only Lu Feng was left. He stood quietly in front of the pagoda, his eyes flashing with a strange light. Finally, Lu Feng smiled. After an hour of observation, Lu Feng finally found something. This seal does indeed have an incomparably terrifying, self-healing ability, as expected of a seal set by the Divine King. But after countless years and countless bombardments, the seal seems to have weakened a lot. An hour has passed. Although it has recovered a lot, it's a pity that the extent is not very great. At this rate, it will probably be impossible to restore it to its previous state in less than a day. A day should be enough. With a happy smile on his face, Lu Feng turned around and walked outside. Perhaps others did not know, but Lu Feng knew very well. He knew the reason why these people did not open this place of worship. In fact, to open this place of worship, they did not need anything at all. The fundamental reason why they could not open was that they did not find the right intersection. The lines that looked like a door were never the real door. After the seal was restored, this ancient and huge pagoda of Futu would be restored to its former state. Except for the flickering light that was covered, all the other lines were like relief sculptures, presented in front of everyone. Of course, if one looked at it from the outside, this was indeed the only place that looked like the real door in the entire pagoda. But Lu Feng knew that this was not the real door at all. After all, in his own mind space, there was a real heavenly Futu. It was a heavenly stupa that was much more complete and vast than the one before. In the mind space, he did not know how long he had cultivated before condensing the primordial body and opening the god's domain. And it was the heavenly Futu that allowed him to obtain these opportunities. Lu Feng still remembered clearly that there were countless lines on the heavenly Futu, although he did not remember all of them. But he still vaguely remembered most of them, and Lu Feng naturally knew the lines that looked like the door. Back then, he had been puzzled about the meaning of these lines. Now, although the Futu pagoda in front of him had not been completely perfected, the location of the real door would not change. Therefore, other than the Divine King of the Underworld and the few Divine Kings who had really walked in here, everyone else had been deceived by these lines. It was not that they could not enter, but that they had never found a real door. Lu Feng was very likely to be the first human besides the Divine King to be able to walk in here. It's not suitable now. I'll come alone at night and give it a try. However, I have to thank these top geniuses of the Federation for helping me with this opportunity today. If they had not opened the seal, even if I knew where the real door was, it would have been useless. It was already afternoon when he left. Lu Feng did not waste any time and returned to the hotel to rest. Time passed slowly. When he came out again, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Feeling that the time was just right, Lu Feng finally came out of the hotel again and drove directly to the place of worship. This time, he did not waste any time. Starting from a place where he could not drive, Lu Feng ran as fast as he could toward the huge Futu pagoda in the center. Compared to the morning and noon, Lu Feng did not waste much time. When he came again, it took him less than 2 hours. Feeling the empty and dark world around him, Lu Feng smiled with satisfaction. In front of him, the place of worship was still blooming with a strange light that belonged to it. But this light was a little strange. In the dark night, such a dazzling light did not illuminate any place around it. That light could only be felt when you looked at it. This was really strange. But Lu Feng did not care much about this. What he really cared about was the thing in the pagoda. After all, that was a divine object that countless geniuses coveted. Looking at the seal that had recovered a little, Lu Feng took a deep breath and began to move along the huge pagoda. Finally, after walking for about 10 minutes, Lu Feng stopped, because he clearly remembered that this was the place where the main entrance to Futu was located. It's here. If I remember correctly, I should be able to enter from here. Taking a deep breath, Lu Feng stretched out his arm and began to condense the power of the bloodline. When it was done, he finally slowly put it on the pagoda. In an instant, everything changed. Everything was completely changed. Looking at everything that was strange yet familiar, Lu Feng was slightly sluggish. He didn't seem to believe that he was here. How? How could it be here? In front of him was an endless dark space. He was a little familiar with this place. After all, he had come in once during the day and afternoon. But it shouldn't be here. Isn't the seal already broken? Isn't the seal still not fully repaired? How could I be here? Lu Feng's face kept twisting. It was not that he was timid, but what he was about to face was too terrifying. That was a terrifying power that could only be resisted by the combined power of countless gods' descendants' bloodlines. The Divine King. Chapter 54. As long as it was related to the Divine King, which one of them was not in existence that could shock the heavens and the earth and make the galaxy tremble. Although the Netherworld Monument was only a projection of a trace of power, the reputation of the Netherworld Monument was too great. Among the few most terrifying martial arts incarnations that were passed down from ancient times, the Netherworld Monument was one of the best. Even those foreign races would tremble at the mention of this name. Lu Feng knew that the power of the seal was definitely at the level of a god. Even after countless years of weakening, it still had the power of a god. During the day, the terrifying giant hand gave Lu Feng too much of a shock. However, when the giant hand of the Gulen god fell, it had the power to easily crush a quasi-life-bearing planet. If the power of a god erupted at full force, perhaps even a second-class life-bearing planet would be completely crushed. Faced with such power, Lu Feng knew that he had no resistance at all. What should I do? What should I do? I remember that we left directly after the external power was released. Apart from this, there must be other ways to leave. There must be. But what should I do? At this moment, Lu Feng thought of the crystal that the mysterious child Luo gave him before they parted. However, this thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. After all, the crystal was still in his body. Even if he wanted to use it now, there was no way for him to do so. After all, he was now in a place similar to the mind space in the past. In a distant place, a penetrating light appeared. A huge object that covered the sky slowly appeared. At this moment, a feeling called despair appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. What was that? Even if it was weakened countless times, even if it was just a trace of the power of a projection, it would still make a god fear or even retreat. Faced with such a thing, there would be no resistance at all. Was he, Lu Feng, going to walk towards the end of the world? This is greed. If it wasn't because of greed, why would I have to face such a situation of certain death alone? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Looking at the terrifyingly huge Yellow Springs monument, Lu Feng understood his fate. That thing required dozens of bloodline powers to fuse together to resist it. As for himself, he didn't even have much bloodline power. Even if he did, it was sealed. What could he do in the face of such a projection of power that surpassed that of gods? Finally, the Yellow Springs monument came crashing down. Death, death. This was an absolute death situation. But it was this certain death situation that ignited Lu Feng's madness at the last moment. Lu Feng, he was the edge, the absolute edge. Similarly, he was also crazy, endlessly crazy. This was Lu Feng. Even if I die, I will fight. There are too many things that I'm worried about. I haven't fulfilled the promise I made, and I haven't found where my hope lies. I don't want to die. I cannot die. I don't want to die. Roaring towards the sky, Lu Feng's body instantly emitted a strange and resplendent light. It was also at this moment that a hazy brilliance appeared on Lu Feng's body in the outside world. His body in the outside world began to tremble involuntarily. Countless runes that could shake everything condensed and flickered, appearing continuously. They tore through the void as if they were descending from endless time and space. Vaguely, they seemed to be covering his body. In a mind space, the terrifying Netherworld monument was about to arrive. Even though they were separated by such a long distance, Lu Feng felt like he was about to be completely crushed. He could feel that his soul was being squeezed by billions of tons of weight, and there was a possibility that it would shatter at any time. Countless formidable strengths began to crazily devour every corner of his soul from all angles. But those inexplicably appearing runes, those endless resplendent lights, gave Lu Feng a formidable strength that allowed him to resist anything. Finally, Lu Feng felt that his end had come. However, just as he was about to despair in this endless sealed space, he felt a powerful force coming from his body in the outside world. It was a kind of profound mystery, a kind of indescribable power covering it. Everything was sent from his body, which was filled with all kinds of power, to his soul. It made his soul stronger, stronger, and stronger. In his eyes, there was a brilliant divine light that penetrated everything. In just an instant, the powerful pressure disappeared completely. At this moment, Lu Feng stood in front of the Netherworld monument that seemed to be able to shatter stars. He watched it come closer and closer, but there was no longer any sense of fear. I understand now. I finally understand Father's words. So, everything is actually like this. So, my bloodline is really incomparably noble. It has finally appeared. It is finally going to boil. Come, come. Let me see what kind of heaven-defying existence Lu Feng's bloodline, the noble bloodline that my father spoke of, is. Young master, what are you waiting for? Uncle Ping looked a little anxious. He looked at young Master Luo, who had been calm all this while, and was about to make a move. However, the moment he wanted to move forward, he was stopped by an arm. Young master, what are you? Young Master Luo shook his head gently. He looked into the distance, at Lu Feng, who was under the endless brilliance with a strange light in his eyes. The atmosphere was slightly strange and incomparably oppressive. However, in the end, young Master Luo said nothing and shook his head gently. Seeing this scene, Uncle Ping was completely anxious. Young master, don't hesitate. If you don't make a move, he will really die. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Death was death. In the face of such danger, if they still did not make a move, Lu Feng's ending would be death. Uncle Ping kept talking in his ear, but young Master Luo shook his head gently in the end. His eyes were unusually resolute. and he did not allow anyone to go against him. Finally, Uncle Ping seemed to have made up his mind. He actually defied young Master Luo's will and wanted to make a move first. However, an arm appeared in front of Uncle Ping. It was an incomparably strong and unshakable arm. Young Master, if you did not use King's Descent during the day, I really would not be your match. However, you have already made a move, so you can't stop me now. A trace of anger flashed across Uncle Ping's eyes. He looked at Lu Feng, whose body was gradually collapsing, and finally shook off young Master Luo's arm. Young Master Luo sighed deeply as he looked at the anxious Uncle Ping in front of him. I know, Uncle Ping. After all, he saved your life. Now that his descendant is in danger, you will definitely not stand by and do nothing. However, did you not think of what? Uncle Ping was slightly taken aback. He did not know what young Master Luo was thinking about. He sighed deeply again. At this moment, young Master Luo's eyes were filled with anticipation and a strange radiance. Don't you know his strength? His strength. In an instant, Uncle Ping finally thought of something. At this moment, a dazzling radiance appeared in his eyes. That's right. This time, I was too rash. Master's existence has already become a legend. Back then, that master gave up everything for this child and chose to break off relations with his family. And for such a precious child, how could he not do anything to protect him? Young Master Luo finally smiled as he looked at Uncle Ping, who had finally regained his composure. This time, he stopped Uncle Ping from saving him. Apart from his existence, he also wanted to take a gamble. He wanted to take a gamble for his family. When he left home, he had already entered the realm of a true god. How could such a powerful person allow his descendant to leave just like that? You have to know that his existence is a legend revered by millions in a faraway place. Lu Feng's body seemed to be in its final moments. At this moment, a trace of anxiety flashed across young Master Luo's eyes. Uncle Ping, who was beside him, had wanted to intervene several times, but was stopped by young Master Luo in the end. Young Master Luo's arm trembled slightly as he looked at Lu Feng, who seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. The corners of his mouth trembled slightly, but Uncle Ping beside him did not hear anything. Could it be that I was wrong? But you have to go through this once. Back then, we sacrificed too much for you. Now we finally see hope. You have to succeed. In the sealed space, Lu Feng's body had already started to fade away. His eyes were dim and lifeless. However, in the colorlessness, there were still two types of light that made everything tremble. One was called the unparalleled sharpness. The other was called endless madness. Unknowingly, the infinitely huge tombstone had already descended from the sky and steadily pressed down on Lu Feng's body. Under normal circumstances, if it had been anyone else, even a god, their soul would have been completely crushed by the terrifying tombstone. However, at this moment, Lu Feng was only an illusion. He had not completely disappeared, although he was already on the verge of death. Lu Feng could still clearly feel every change in his body and soul, much more clearly than ever before. When the Yellow Springs tombstone's illusion descended, Lu Feng once again felt that he was about to die. However, at that moment, he seemed to have seen the existence of a shackle. Faintly, cracks began to appear on the shackles. At the moment of life and death, countless rays of golden light, filled with the essence of truth, surged into the cracks. The appearance of these rays of light actually allowed him to resist the violent power. After that, every time the Yellow Springs tombstone was about to crush him, the rays of light would appear and inject new power into him, preventing him from completely dying. Chapter 55. Now, it was another dangerous moment, and it was the most dangerous moment, because the Acheron monument seemed to be enraged. At this moment, it actually manifested its entire body and gathered in the supreme dark void. It wanted to use its strongest power to completely pulverize Lu Feng. If it were not for his powerful bloodline power, his soul would have been shattered into pieces long ago. But now, through the shackles of the seal, the bloodline power was gradually unable to provide enough power. This unparalleled majesty caused Lu Feng's will to become blurry. Even his thoughts were fading. Looking at the descending, invincible monument for the last time, Lu Feng finally gained a moment of clarity. In those sharp and crazy eyes, there was actually the most arrogant belief surging at the same time. Come on, come on. What life and death, what fate? I, Lu Feng, have never been afraid of anything. Anything. Don't even think about controlling my fate. The Yellow Spring Steel's infinitely large body finally descended slowly once again. Make your move. At this moment, young Master Luo had already given up. He finally gave up on his previous plan. After all, once Lu Feng died, everything would be irreversible in the next instant. A dazzling light appeared on young Master Luo's body. That was a strong and invincible power that covered the heavens. Dazzling and invincible. At this moment, young Master Luo was truly using all his power. Although it was not as strong as when he used the Supreme Guardian King's descent during the day, it was not much weaker now. Young Master Luo also made his move. Uncle Ping finally stopped suppressing. Similarly, he ignited his peak power. He was a perfect stage martial artist like young Master Luo. He was even a peak existence, almost a deity who was about to become a god. His move also shook the heavens and earth. The infinite light burned to the extreme. At this moment, young Master Luo seemed to have become the light source of everything. At this moment, it was so similar to the day. He actually used that terrifying and heaven-defying Supreme Guardian King's descent once again. In an instant, the two of them actually crossed the infinite distance and appeared directly in front of Lu Feng. They mustered all their strength and struck the ancient Futu Pagoda with shocking power. Boom! A loud sound could be heard. Young Master Luo relied on his invincible attack to defeat gods. Although he was no longer as powerful as he was during the day, he was still extremely terrifying. With such a joint attack, everything within a radius of 100,000 miles would be sunk, turning into endless ruins. Endless smoke and dust appeared, filling the entire space. But the enormous Buddha's pagoda didn't even shake in the slightest, and it was even to the extent that everything in its surroundings didn't change in the slightest. In the next moment, two figures shot out from the endless smoke and dust. They flew backwards all the way, smashing through hundreds and thousands of ordinary pagodas. This was a technique in the blink of an eye, and they flew more than 100 miles away. Young Master Luo struggled to crawl up from the ground. At this moment, his face was filled with despair and horror. How is this possible? That's impossible. Isn't it only possible to trigger that kind of power when the power of a god attacks the seal? Why? Why is Lu Feng, who isn't even a martial artist, able to trigger his will? The Divine King of the Netherworld. That's the will of the Divine King of the Netherworld. In the smoke and dust, no one could see, no one could understand, and no one was willing to believe. Because the scene in front of them was too horrifying, too shocking. At this moment, Lu Feng's entire body was covered in endless blood. His appearance was extremely miserable. However, what was truly shocking was not this. It was the huge image that appeared in the endless smoke and dust above Lu Feng. It was an ancient tombstone that flickered with countless runes. It was the most powerful tombstone that suppressed an era, causing the entire universe to tremble. It actually manifested at this moment. The terrifying tombstone began to descend, as if it wanted to completely slaughter Lu Feng, to completely crush Lu Feng. This was a kind of indescribable power, the most powerful force that shook the entire space-time. However, the dazzling radiance above Lu Feng's body also put him in an indescribable state, making Lu Feng invincible. Even in the face of such a huge tombstone, he didn't seem to be at a disadvantage. In the mind space, Lu Feng stared blankly at the towering giant in front of him. He no longer felt any pressure. However, he understood that he was facing an even more dangerous and inexplicable situation, because at this moment, he was facing a giant, an invincible supreme that stood on the tombstone overlooking countless living beings. The Netherworld, the divine king of the Netherworld. At this moment, the giant that appeared in front of Lu Feng was actually a ruler. It was the most invincible existence that had dominated billions of years, the divine king of the Netherworld. He had actually appeared. After being stunned for a moment, the divine king of the Netherworld gently waved his arm. That power was too powerful, too unimaginable, and there was no way to deal with it. Lu Feng could sense that the appearance of this power was actually several times more terrifying than the full blow of the Netherworld tombstone. This was simply inexplicable. Seeing that this final blow was about to kill him, Lu Feng finally lost all reason and started to go completely crazy. Bloodline boil. I know that your existence is also unyielding, the greatest invincible. Boil. Bloom in my body. Let this invincible bloodline revive in my body and break through the obstacles of heaven and earth once more. Bloodline. Lu Feng knew that the reason he was safe and sound was all because of that invincible bloodline. His bloodline had never been weak. It had never been thin. It was just that it was sealed. However, in this moment of crisis, it still forcefully passed through all obstacles and delivered the strongest power to him again and again. It allowed him to find a sliver of hope in this crisis, allowing him to break through the obstacles of heaven and earth and reach the peak. And now, this was a confrontation of the extremes. This was the descent of the divine king's majesty. This was his representative. In the face of this, Lu Feng did not tremble in the slightest. He was not afraid at all. All he had was a kind of madness, a kind of sharpness. The giant arm fell. That blow seemed to be the embodiment of the divine king of the Netherworld's peerless will. He wanted to use his own power to destroy all existences that dared to challenge him. This was a kind of peerless and invincible stance. This was a peerless sharpness that belonged to the previous era that overlooked the entire universe, that made billions of races submit, that made the existence of the divine king fear and unable to retreat. Kill. The most terrifying vision had already appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. At this moment, he heard it. He finally heard the sound of the shackles in his body shattering. He finally saw the endless golden light flowing out of the seal. The shackles had shattered. King. That is the majesty of the king. That is the will of the king. He succeeded. He really succeeded. At the final moment of despair, at the moment of withering, young Master Luo's eyes were lifeless. In the next moment, his eyes flashed with disbelief and a kind of crazy excitement. Although he had used a peerless technique, although his body was seriously injured, young Master Luo could no longer care about anything else. He struggled to stand up from the ground and looked into the distance. The golden aura that broke through the obstacles of heaven and earth, the majestic aura that shook the entire era, and the endless dusk, could no longer control himself and suppress the madness in his heart. Beside him, Uncle Ping was in a daze. He did not feel anything, only a kind of complete sluggishness. The corners of his mouth were trembling as he muttered. Amidst the endless smoke and dust, a person was still a person. However, he was no longer a person. At the moment, the endless golden light had completely submerged Lu Feng. It had completely soaked Lu Feng. Countless unimaginable power runes appeared and descended from time and space. They started to transform Lu Feng's body continuously, causing his physical body to undergo a complete transformation that shook everything. Bloodline awakening. I made the right bet. His bloodline has finally awakened completely under the majesty of the divine king. This is the densest bloodline of the king since ancient times. He has finally broken through the restrictions of the bloodline shackles and arrived in this era. Tremble, Milky Way. Tremble endlessly, all the billions of races in the universe. The invincible majesty of the Lu family and the most glorious era of humankind are about to arrive. The bloodline of the greatest king has been completely awakened. In an instant, several extremely ancient existences suddenly opened their eyes. They looked in the same direction in horror and were filled with complicated expressions. The bloodline shackles have been shattered. A primordial divine descendant has finally broken through the obstacles and transformed into an azure dragon. He's about to leave the abyss of the azure parasol. What kind of bloodline is this? Why is it so powerful? It even makes me feel like I'm trembling. I wonder which divine descendant of the divine king has such a terrifying majesty. This era is about to be turbulent again. Several extremely terrifying divine consciousnesses appeared and traversed through space and time. Any time and space restrictions were nothing in their eyes. This was the most powerful belief and soul. It made all living beings tremble and hesitate. However, just as they wanted to see which bloodline belonged to, an equally powerful majesty appeared and blocked countless divine consciousnesses, making it difficult for them to see the real situation. Bastard, who dares to disturb us? Investigate. Let the people of the family take action. We must find out which bloodline has appeared. Investigate this thoroughly. Chapter 56. Outside Gufang Star, a majestic figure stood quietly in the endless starry sky. Beside him, there was nothing but a blurry image. I originally thought that although there were only 5 emperors in our era, it would be enough to become the most powerful golden generation in the past few thousand years. But now it seems that I was wrong. As one of the strongest bloodlines in the past, as one of the most powerful young emperors among the billions of races in the endless galaxy, you should be very gratified to be surpassed. Gratified, that's right, gratified. Because the person who surpassed him was his child, Gulen. Actually, I didn't expect him to reach this step. Back then, we did everything we could but failed to awaken his bloodline. In the end, I took him away from the family. At that time, all I wanted was for him to live a carefree life. But who would have thought that the things that we, the royal god's descendant, couldn't accomplish would now be accomplished by himself? I don't know if this is a good or bad thing for him. Hearing the words of the figure, the Gulen god sighed. He looked at the incomparably huge Gufang star beneath his feet. In the end, he shook his head gently. This is his fate, a fate that nothing can take away or change. His awakening in this era has already determined everything. 500 years. It's already been 500 years. Our human race no longer has any divine king. For the human race that dominates countless galaxies and is one of the most powerful races in the entire universe, this is definitely a dangerous signal. We once thought, and even those hidden peak existences of the ancient families thought so too, that you're the one with the greatest hope of reaching that step. But now it seems that this honor is about to change. Turning around and looking at the figure, the Gulen god revealed a trace of helplessness. Now it seems that the one with the greatest hope of reaching that final step isn't you, but your child. Hearing this, the hazy figure finally showed a trace of fluctuation. Although the Gulen god was still somewhat worried. If it were him, he couldn't help but feel proud. You don't have to trouble yourself with this matter. Just now, you shattered the consciousness of those old farts. They definitely won't find out about your child's existence. I think you don't have to worry about the 2 people down there. He's a member of the Lu family, and from the looks of it, they seem to know Lu Feng's identity. The one called Lu Luo was also a good seedling. If he can improve further in the future, then it is very likely that he will be another you. The Lu family is indeed his bloodline. Even in this era where human geniuses are scarce, you still make the billions of races in the universe look askance. This time, the shadow didn't say anything. Because at this moment, his body was already transparent, almost disappearing. Gulan, seal off all information. You don't have to worry about the 2 members of the Lu family. This time, I Lu Tao owe you. In the future, I will repay you. Finally, his body disappeared completely. Looking at the empty, starry sky, Gulen God's expression was no longer as relaxed as before. At this moment, he seemed to be shrouded in a layer of majesty. Looking at the huge Gulen star, he finally sighed softly, his expression extremely solemn. Lu Tao, when you first became a god-slayer, although we were opponents, we also placed our hopes on you. However, in the end, you still fell before that step because of those bastards. Now, your child has appeared. This time, I definitely won't let such a thing happen again. The entire sacrificial ground, which used to be the last forbidden ground of the ancient Fong civilization, was now completely enveloped by a boundless, resplendent brilliance. This dazzling brilliance could illuminate the entire world. This unparalleled phenomenon naturally caused a commotion in the entire ancient Fong city. Countless existences rushed toward the sacrificial ground, fearing to be the first to arrive. However, what they faced was a boundless army. The armies belonging to the dozens of cities around ancient Fong City were actually all gathered here, preventing anyone from entering. Just like that, countless people gathered to watch, but they were unable to see the real situation. At this moment, Lu Feng's body, which existed in the outside world, was undergoing an endless, mysterious transformation. This was a kind of blood-soaked rebirth, a brand new life blossoming from the endless blood. Countless runes had already reached an extreme level of density. It was also at this moment that faint cracks appeared on Lu Feng's body. In the blink of an eye, countless cracks appeared. His entire body was like glass as the cracks spread all over his body. A dense, bronze radiance gradually appeared from his body and soon dyed his entire body. This body, which was wrapped in endless golden light, revealed a strange, dazzling brilliance. The terrifying, huge yellow spring steel's phantom swayed in the outside world, but it didn't descend, as if it was afraid of something. However, just as Lu Feng was about to complete his shocking transformation, it finally couldn't hold back any longer. It suddenly descended toward the bronze body that was tinged with golden light. This was an unfathomable power. Any existence below a god couldn't resist such power. If this had happened in the past, this body would have been completely shattered and turned into endless dust. However, at this moment, everything changed. An ancient phenomenon vaguely appeared behind Lu Feng's body. It was a terrifying existence without a face. It was boundlessly blurry. From top to bottom, there was an ancient desolation. It was a kind of endless desolation. Endless aura rose. It was the aura that belonged to a demon. It was the aura of a great demon that surpassed all true demons and heavenly demons. The first level of the great demon true body, bronze body great demon, large success. Demonic flames filled the sky, burning everything in the world. Everything was being destroyed. Billions of living beings were frightened and trembling. This was a kind of trembling that came from the depths of their souls. It was a kind of dominion that couldn't be resisted. This kind of power had already surpassed any kind of reverence. Gulen God looked at the region where the light soared into the sky. An unprecedented look of shock finally appeared on his face. He couldn't believe that such a terrifying amount of power was being emitted from such a weak body. Such power was enough to kill even a god at this moment. I hate the heavens for allowing me to live in the same world as the king. Is this the power of the bloodline of the strongest king since ancient times? Madness, endless madness. At this moment, Lu Feng's physical body had already reached an endless state of madness. Countless bloodline powers were being drawn out by him, madly strengthening the invincible great demon. It gradually began to expand, as if there was no end to it. Finally, at this final moment, the most powerful collision occurred. It was a punch, an unparalleled and indescribable punch. The ancient great devil became the boiling blood, the eternal source of slaughter. His fist struck out with boundless brilliance, destroying all obstacles and shackles. Finally, the heavens broke. King, that is the power of a king. After shattering the bloodline's unlock, he can actually release the power of a king. Lu Luo went crazy. At this moment, his eyes were incomparably red, although he didn't recognize the existence of the demonic flames. That incomparably eye-catching golden light couldn't be concealed. From it, he could feel the throbbing of his bloodline. It was an ancient summon. That was the majesty of a king. That was the aura of their ancestor, the bloodline of the first king since ancient times. He had finally awakened, completely awakened the most powerful bloodline. The future belonged to mankind, to the Lu family, shattering the heavens, shattering time and space, shattering everything. Finally, that punch completely shattered everything. In the empty sky, one could vaguely see the countless outer starry skies. This was an incomprehensible power. Facing such a blow, even God Gulan trembled slightly, having the urge to fight. However, he knew that this wasn't Lu Feng's true strength. It was just an extreme power that was instantly produced after the king's bloodline was unlocked. Perhaps after he became a god, he could once again erupt with such a peerless attack. But now it was absolutely impossible. However, he could wait. He could really wait. Your father is overflowing with talent and can be said to be the pinnacle of the universe's myriad races. But you are even stronger than your father. Perhaps after you become a true god, I won't be your opponent. But the moment you step into the god realm, I can still suppress you with my strength that is one level higher than yours. After all, your bloodline is really too terrifying. In the dark space, Lu Feng felt the completion of his transformation and his breakthrough, but he didn't feel much joy, because at this moment, his eyes were replaced by shock. Everything in front of him was so shocking that he found it hard to believe, because at this moment, in this dark space, in front of the blood-red giant, a figure actually appeared. It was an invincible figure that spanned across the ages and suppressed all generations. His strongest attack was shattered by this invincible golden giant, without any suspense or the slightest fluctuation. Lu Feng knew that the blood-red giant was the supreme being of the universe, the divine king of the underworld, who had once plunged the entire universe into endless fear. He was the pinnacle existence among the divine kings. He was a peerless overlord that even other existences at the divine king realm had to avoid. However, at this moment, in front of the illusory golden giant, he was completely no match for it. Everything was directly shattered by it. At this moment, Lu Feng had an indescribable feeling. This golden giant seemed to be him, or perhaps it was his bloodline. This seemed to be the golden bloodline that was moving within the endless seals and shackles. Chapter 57. Could it be that my bloodline is also... Lu Feng was silent. He had already vaguely guessed it. To be able to suppress the remnant consciousness of the divine king and completely shatter it, perhaps some gods could do it. But to be able to do it at the same level, only an existence of the same level could do it. It could only be the peerless divine king, who is also known as the supreme of the universe. He, Lu Feng, actually had the bloodline of the divine king. The two invincible giants looked at each other, but they did not do anything. They no longer had any will. They were just the projection of a remnant power. After a long time, the two invincible existences made their move again. But this time, it was as if they were plucking the stars and setting the moon. They were completely destroying everything. Lu Feng could clearly feel it. In such a terrifying confrontation, any bit of power that leaked out was enough to shatter the land within a radius of 1,000,000 miles. In their hands, even the simplest wave of their arms contained unimaginable profoundness and profundities. Lu Feng did not understand. He knew that his level was really too low. Even if he had opened up the god's domain and had the ability to comprehend things that no one else could reach, he still could not see through the peerless mysteries that only appeared at the level of gods, or even supreme of the universe. But even so, Lu Feng was still frantically trying to memorize. He knew that in the future, all of these would be invaluable treasures to him. One day, he would be able to comprehend all of these and be able to integrate them. In the pervasive darkness, the two invincible giants had already fought to the extreme. Finally, the blood-red giant could no longer hold on. His body began to slowly collapse. Everything was slowly dissipating. Looking at the golden giant, Lu Feng's shock did not diminish at all. He saw it clearly and understood it clearly. From the beginning to the end, the divine king of Netherworld did not have the slightest ability to fight back in front of his ancestor, the divine king. He had always been completely suppressed. Gradually, the endless darkness started to become transparent as the remnant consciousness of the divine king of Netherworld's projection disappeared. As for the golden divine king, he seemed to have reached his limit. In the next moment, he began to disperse completely. However, unlike the Yellow Springs divine king, the primogenitor divine king transformed into countless rays of light and countless runes. They danced, surged, and followed a mysterious and beautiful trajectory, pouring into Lu Feng's soul. Transformations, endless transformations. At this moment, Lu Feng felt that he had undergone an earth-shattering change. The shackles had been completely shattered. Countless true essences of power and countless surging bloodline powers were all released. Although he had wasted a lot of power to support the bronze Great Devil's projection, he was still able to control it. However, it wouldn't take long for this terrifying bloodline to condense again. They had already broken through the layers of barriers from the endless seals and had forever merged with Lu Feng's bloodline. The golden bloodline had already become Lu Feng's bloodline. It had already become the terrifying thing he relied on his path to the peak in the future. Such a change was complete. It was a complete change from his soul to his soul. After a moment, he saw light once again from the endless darkness. In front of him was an ancient door that had opened in a flash. Endless suppression and panic seemed to be able to swallow everything, just like the ultimate black hole of the universe. It lay quietly in front of Lu Feng. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng didn't move. He just stood there quietly. At this moment, he was most concerned about the changes in his body and the success of his transformation. He closed his eyes slightly and opened them after a long time. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with endless joy. This kind of surprise wasn't much worse than obtaining the Origin Sutra and the Great Devil True Body. I actually broke through to the intermediate warrior realm in an instant, the first realm of the Great Devil True Body, the Copper Body Great Devil Realm. After the Bloodline Awakening, I feel that my aptitude and strength seem to have undergone a terrifying upgrade. It's a transformation that surpasses any other. In the dark space, the power of the runes actually allowed my divine origin to open up and become several times stronger. This degree of opening has increased my comprehension and soul control ability by more than 10 times. Is all of this real? Who exactly did my bloodline come from? At this moment, Lu Feng finally remembered the great bloodline that his father had talked about during the holidays. At that time, his father had been wild with joy because he had become a psychic master. He had also said that he would tell Luo Yunyang everything when he returned. Now, Lu Feng was looking forward to it. The strength of my bloodline is close to limitless. It's also in the form of a projection, but it can actually suppress the great ancient divine king of the underworld, the supreme divine king of the universe. Then, who is the ancestor of this bloodline? Who is my ancestor? After pondering for a moment, he thought of all the divine kings in history. In the blink of an eye, Lu Feng seemed to have remembered. At this moment, his body stiffened slightly, and his expression was one of disbelief. Am I his bloodline? Is this possible? He took a deep breath. Other than him, Lu Feng could not think of anyone else. After all, although there were differences in strength among the divine kings, He was the only one in history who could easily suppress the peerless divine king of the underworld, who was already at the peak of the universe. I'm actually his bloodline. After thinking deeply again, Lu Feng was finally sure that he was the descendant of that great supreme existence. I didn't expect that I, Lu Feng, would be a divine descendant, and a divine descendant of the highest level. I used to think that I was just an ordinary person, but who would have thought that my bloodline would be so noble? Fate really likes to joke. Words were a kind of helplessness. But at the last moment, the moment Lu Feng raised his head, it was filled with a strange kind of determination. Now, there was no battle, no conflict, but at this moment, a dazzling brilliance appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. This was so similar to the previous battle. In his eyes, there was infinite sharpness. In his eyes, there was endless madness. My fate is not something that anyone can decide. Never, never. My lord. Transformation, everything came so suddenly. All of a sudden, Lu Feng felt that he had transformed once again. But this time, it was only his heart that changed. It was only a kind of belief. Perhaps in the past, his greatest dream was to become a strong person, to become an existence that was admired by tens of thousands of people, to make his so-called family members, to make those who had looked down on him regret. But now, Lu Feng suddenly felt that those were really nothing. Everything in the past was just a simple obstacle on his path. For the current him, he could completely cross it by lifting his foot slightly. Only the supreme shackles, the ultimate shackles of fate that troubled countless living beings, were the greatest seals, the shackles that Lu Feng had to break through in the end. The determination in his eyes was unprecedented. Lu Feng knew that the biggest gain this time was not the awakening of his bloodline, but that he had found the path, the true path that belonged to him in the future. Only this path could push him to the peak, to the highest point that surpassed all others. Then let me see what the final legacy of the great ancient civilization is. Lu Feng's heart, which had just calmed down at this moment, began to beat violently again. The ancient civilization was a powerful civilization that was long before humans became the peak race of the universe. The degree of brilliance was unparalleled. According to the Federation, at the peak of the ancient civilization, although it was not comparable to the peak races of the universe, it was not too far off. Later, the ancient civilization was completely destroyed by a powerful civilization. According to speculation, that civilization should be one of the peak races of the universe at that time. After all, a race or civilization that wanted to destroy such a terrifying civilization had definitely reached the peak of the universe. The existence of something that could make a peak civilization of the universe go crazy to the point that they did not hesitate to fight against a sub-peak civilization was self-evident. Lu Feng knew that apart from the Divine King, he was the first existence to enter here. Legend had it that the god kings that had entered this place had not taken anything away from it. So if there was really something that could make a peak race go crazy, it must still be here. It's a pity that apart from me, apart from the Divine King, other existences probably don't know where the real door is. I'm afraid that even if they spend countless years, they will only put all their attention on the door-shaped lines and do everything they can to open it. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's face showed a trace of ridicule. After all, he already knew the origin of the ancient star and the existence of this Futu pagoda. If he wanted to use brute force to open this place, he would have to fight against this endlessly huge ancient star. To be able to do this, he was afraid that only the existence of the Divine King would be able to do it. Looking at the seal behind him that had closed and reappeared, Lu Feng did not hesitate. He had a feeling that if he wanted to get out of here, he would not have to go through such a terrifying life and death experience. He could walk out of here as long as he wanted, but if he wanted to come in again, it would be troublesome. Therefore, Lu Feng really did not want to give up this opportunity that he had exchanged with his life, even if he knew that there might be danger ahead. Lu Feng still did not know how, did not want, and could not give up. Then let's go. Finally, he stepped into it. Chapter 58. Compared to what he saw from the outside world, the space in this huge Futu pagoda was too big. It was so big that he couldn't believe it was what he saw from the outside world. As expected of the ancient Fong civilization, a powerful existence second only to the peak race and civilization of the universe. Among them, there must be quasi-supreme existences. Otherwise, how could they build such a huge world? It's a pity that when this world was approaching perfection, it was completely shattered. Otherwise, a universe supreme-level strong being like the Divine King would have appeared in the ancient Fong civilization, and the ancient Fong civilization would have entered the ranks of the peak race and civilization of the universe. This place was a world. It was a personal world evolved by an invincible being. He had placed his world here in order to store the true relics of the ancient Fong clan. He kept walking, but in the next moment, Lu Feng's expression suddenly changed, and it became extremely ugly. That's right. If that's really the case, then this time, didn't I come in vain? On his face, there was a trace of unwillingness and helplessness. I should have thought of this long ago. To be able to become a peak race or civilization of the universe, I'm afraid that the Divine King exists or once produced a Divine King. And this place had a quasi-supreme existence overseeing it, but it was still completely destroyed. Then, presumably, among the races that collided with the ancient Fong civilization, there must be a Divine King overseeing it. Since the Divine King has taken action, is there anything left here? His footsteps stopped. Lu Feng didn't know if he should continue walking. After all, if it was really as he thought, then what was the point of him going through so much trouble and experiencing life and death to come here? After thinking about it for a while, his tense face began to relax a little. However, the benefits I got this time are simply unimaginable. To be able to awaken the bloodline of the ancestor Divine King is already extremely precious, not inferior to the wealth of Tong Tian Futu. In that case, so what if I can't get anything? Since I'm already here, let's go in and take a look. After all, I'm the first living being to have seen everything apart from the Divine King. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's footsteps finally landed again as he walked towards the depths. It had to be said that although the world constructed by a quasi-supreme wasn't perfect, it was close to perfection, other than the fact that it didn't have the ability to completely evolve all kinds of principles and laws. It wasn't much different in size. A perfect world created by a God King expert, even if it was the weakest God King, would be able to create an infinitely vast perfect world. It wouldn't be much worse than a super life planet. Lu Feng could naturally sense that the area of this place was probably not much smaller than Gufang's star below him. Even so, he still walked in. It wasn't that there was something wrong with Lu Feng's brain, but he had already seen it. He saw it. In the distance, there was an incomparably terrifying cave that seemed to connect to the heavens. The moment he entered, Lu Feng had already discovered the existence of the cave. Although it was incomparably huge and very far from here, Lu Feng could calculate that at his speed, he should be able to reach it in a day at most. Now, he had already become a copper-body great demon who had cultivated the first stage of the great demon true body to the realm of Deshang. Lu Feng's physical strength had intensified, and he had advanced to the level of an intermediate warrior. Lu Feng could feel that, because of the awakening of his bloodline, although 99% of the power was still hidden in his own bloodline, the mere trace of power that appeared was enough to strengthen and upgrade his physical body. The power in his physical body now was definitely not just at the level of 10 stars. According to the feeling that Lu Feng had once erupted with the power of 100 stars, at this moment, the power contained in his body was at least more than 40 stars. In other words, he was now at least an intermediate warrior. Moreover, Lu Feng also discovered something that surprised him. That was, the power in his punch, just now, seemed to have increased even more, although he was not sure how much. But Lu Feng could be sure that the power increase of that punch was definitely not just 4 times as before. The awakening of the bloodline allowed him to complete the second transformation of his body. With his current speed, He could run 500 kilometers in an hour at full strength. And the horror of this primitive body was enough to support him running for several hours without reaching his limit. Therefore, after confirming that there was no danger around, Lu Feng began to speed up. It had to be said that Lu Feng's speculation was very accurate. He estimated that he should be able to reach the front of the huge cave in a day's time. And now, when he arrived in front of the crack that seemed to tear the world apart, almost a day had passed. When he was in front of it, Lu Feng really realized the horror of this crack. This was a kind of indescribable size. Visual inspection, just visual inspection, Lu Feng felt that this terrifying crack was hundreds of thousands of meters long. Looking from a distance, it was like a terrifying black hole that could swallow everything. And in front of this crack, Lu Feng saw an ancient altar that towered into the sky. It stood there quietly, as if it had not changed at all since ancient times. It was condensed with endless brilliance, rich with the imprint of trillions of time and space, and engraved with immortal and ancient civilization. Lu Feng took a deep breath. Looking at these miraculous buildings, he had an unprecedented shock. These were the condensation of a real civilization. Although modern technology could also create such huge buildings, or even more spectacular than this. However, all of that had a kind of flashy and virtual appearance, losing the ancient solemnity and the accumulation of civilization. Relying only on the accumulation of technology at most, it gave people a kind of visual shock. It was far from being able to shock people's hearts. The ancient altar in front of him, if changed to a floor, was at most comparable to those high-rise buildings with thousands of floors. However, its existence was far from being comparable to any other building. This was because Lu Feng could feel a mighty energy fluctuation coming from the altar. What was condensed was a terrifying power that was beyond any imagination. Once it erupted, the world would be destroyed and the years would wither. In front of it, not to mention some 1,000-floor high-rise buildings, perhaps even the highest crystallization of the Federation's technology, those ultimate deterrent interstellar fortresses, would be completely inadequate. This is the last existence of the ancient civilization. Here, it should be where the last true essence and inheritance of the ancient civilization is merged. Could it be that that peak race didn't have a divine king powerhouse, or that the divine king powerhouse didn't come here? Lu Feng felt suspicious, because the altar in this place did not have the slightest trace of damage at all. Not even the slightest trace of damage. He could feel the terrifying protective power on the periphery of this place. If he wanted to enter here, he could only do it with absolute violence. But here, there was really no damage at all. This made Lu Feng fall into doubt again. Finally, he no longer waited. He walked in the direction of the altar. Now, Lu Feng could be considered to have given up on his previous idea. The moment he saw the altar, he already understood that even if there was really some shocking wealth, something that even the divine king would be tempted by, it did not belong to him. After all, no matter how lucky he was now, he was just a mid-level warrior. Those seals, he really wanted to, but he was powerless. Gradually, Lu Feng was about to reach the bottom of the altar. But as he walked, Lu Feng's eyes became more and more shocked. The light in his eyes became more and more inconceivable. Unknowingly, he had already sped up to a degree that even he did not expect. He saw the divine king. That is the yellow spring steel. The yellow spring steel is actually condensed here. How is that possible? This kind of truth, this kind of majesty, this is definitely the true condensation of the yellow spring steel. What is the divine king of the yellow spring trying to do? What is he trying to do? Under the ancient altar, there were 3 almost solid existences floating quietly. And Lu Feng recognized one of them at a glance. That was the yellow spring steel. Compared to the illusory figure in the seal outside, the yellow spring steel here was too eye-catching, because it was almost beyond the category of illusory figures. Lu Feng also recognized this appearance. This was a kind of martial path magical ability that could materialize. In order to maintain this state for thousands of years, what was needed was not something that the power of the seal could compare to. This was something that could only be achieved by someone who was at least a deity and had to specially condense it for a very long time. They had to constantly reflect their martial path incarnation and reinforce it over and over again. It would take a very long time for this martial path incarnation to leave the martial path's body and exist independently. This incarnation in front of him was the yellow spring steel. It was the immortal steel that represented countless bloodshed and glory throughout history. At this moment, it was actually condensed here by the divine king of the yellow spring. This was really too unbelievable. After all, condensing this yellow spring steel and casually setting up a seal could not be compared. However, why did the divine king of the yellow spring specially reflect his martial path incarnation here? Lu Feng could not understand. He felt a kind of confusion, a kind of unknown. However, Lu Feng could not understand the crux of this. After all, he was now too far away from the existence of the divine king. Not continuing to observe the yellow spring steel, Lu Feng looked at the existence beside it. In the beginning, he was slightly puzzled. However, as time passed, Lu Feng finally recognized what that thing was. At this moment, his face was filled with endless shock and completely changed. He looked at that ancient long sword and was speechless. Emperor's sword. This is the peerless divine weapon of that peerless godly king. It was condensed from his martial arts avatar and combined with countless technologies and refining techniques in the entire universe to create this peerless divine weapon, the heavenly Emperor's sword. The divine king of the heavens, one of the great divine kings of the human race, also entered here and even left his own peerless divine weapon here. What is the purpose of all this? Chapter 59. Lu Feng looked at the last existence anxiously. He had already vaguely guessed what it was. In the records, only 3 divine kings had truly walked into this place. The first divine king was the divine king of the netherworld who discovered this place. The second was the divine king of the heavenly emperor. And these 2 invincible existences had left their most precious and powerful things here. Then the remaining third existence, which could coexist with the netherworld monument and the heavenly emperor's sword, was probably the last martial art avatar, Tindra Lynx. As expected, it's him, the martial art avatar of the divine king of the heavenly emperor, the terrifying beast that could swallow heaven and earth and shatter the galaxy under its feet. The Tindra Lynx. As expected, he had appeared here as well. At this moment, Lu Feng kept sucking in cold air. The 3 peerless divine kings had left their most precious things here. What was all of this for? Could it be that they were going to collide here across space and time? To determine who was the most powerful peerless divine king in this endless space and time, the supreme of the universe. This was the only thought that Lu Feng could think of. This time, Lu Feng hesitated again. The things in front of him were too shocking. They were things that only the most extreme existences in the universe could appear. And he was only a mid-level warrior. There was still a huge gap between him and the gods. Even the gods couldn't touch these things. How could he not be afraid? Looking at the 3 great visions that belonged to the ancient divine king, Lu Feng hesitated slightly. But the next moment, he still took a step forward. No matter what, I'm already here. I must see what it is. This place is definitely closely related to the heavenly Futu in my mind space. This is the best opportunity. I must find out what the truth is. Biting hard, Lu Feng finally walked toward the ancient altar in the center, surrounded by the 3 great visions. Step by step, step by step. Every step was done with extreme caution. Lu Feng knew that it was meaningless to be so careful. After all, no matter what kind of danger he encountered here, he had no hope of surviving. However, due to his nature, he had no choice but to raise his spirits. Soon, they arrived in front of the huge altar. At this time, Lu Feng felt that the sacrifice was even more indescribable. Tall and big. This was the appearance. However, this alone was not enough to make Lu Feng's soul tremble. Watching from such a close distance, Lu Feng was even more shocked. At this moment, the ancient solemnity, the trembling that came from the depths of his soul, and the feeling of desolation and desolation constantly assaulted his mind, making it difficult for him to stand. Just as Lu Feng's face was deathly pale and he was about to fall to the ground, the blood in his body began to boil. Endless golden light appeared and enveloped Lu Feng's entire body. Relying on the power of the boiling blood, Lu Feng finally stood still and was not completely destroyed by the ancient aura of the altar. Looking at the altar in front of him, Lu Feng could not believe that just a trace of aura was enough to make him completely collapse and decay. This was really too shocking. He believed that if someone else came here, as long as they had not opened up the god's domain and did not have a bloodline, even a true warrior would be instantly overwhelmed by the ancient and desolate aura and turn into nothingness. Only a god could resist the desolate aura that the ancient altar unintentionally emitted. Only a true god could do that. This was really hard to imagine. How powerful was the ancient civilization back then? The existence of such an altar is like an invincible weapon. If it is activated, I'm afraid even a god would be affected endlessly. Lu Feng was horrified. He stared at the terrifying altar, his eyes filled with endless shock. In his body, the boiling blood was becoming more and more powerful, more and more extreme. Lu Feng knew that his bloodline was most likely inherited from him, that invincible existence. But just an ordinary aura could not affect him at all. It could be said that if someone wanted to affect him, unless it was the will of a god, then only that kind of targeted oppressive aura could make him feel difficult. Although the sacrificial ground in front of him had a terrifying power that surpassed that of a god, after countless years of precipitation, it seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber. These unconscious auras, after Lu Feng's blood boiled, were unable to affect him too much. But why do I feel like there's something wrong? The Divine King was not born during the ancient civilization's most powerful period. But the ancient altar they condensed has already become so powerful that it has not awakened at all. Just the ancient and desolate aura it unintentionally emits can already affect gods and above. And the martial art incarnations of the three peerless divine king don't emit the slightest majesty. It seems to be just a picture. This doesn't make sense. This really doesn't make sense. The martial art incarnations condensed by the divine king, and even these incarnations that had undergone countless years of refinement, were absolutely terrifying to an extreme degree. As long as they existed, even if they were separated by layers of seals, they would still emit world-shaking power. This was the case with the seal outside. Back then, the divine king of the netherworld had probably just casually laid down the seal, but after such a long time, if one wanted to rely on brute force to open it, it would still require a god-level existence to do so. One had to know that what existed in the seal was only a trace of the divine king of the netherworld's brand and a projection of the netherworld steel's power. And the martial art incarnations here were far from what the seal could compare to. There was no comparison between the two at all. But why were these three terrifying martial art incarnations not the slightest bit of effect? In the next moment, Lu Feng finally took a step onto the altar. And it was also at this moment that a kind of spiritual tremor occurred. This was a kind of shock that went straight to the depths of one's soul. It was an existence that had nothing to do with any bloodline or power. Cold sweat instantly flowed down his cheeks. Lu Feng's face was pale. He realized that it was extremely difficult for him to even move a single step at the moment. Looking at the endless stairs, Lu Feng fell silent for a moment. Then, a trace of madness flashed in his eyes. His footsteps finally landed on the ground again. The second step, the third step, step by step, Lu Feng began the extremely difficult climb. Every time he moved forward, there would be countless obstacles. The terrifying majesty in his soul would deepen by a lot, causing his movements to become sluggish. However, Lu Feng would forcefully pass through each obstacle every time. And Lu Feng realized that the more steps he walked, the firmer his willpower in the depths of his heart became. The firmness of one's willpower did not have any direct benefits for the cultivation of a warrior or a telekinesis master. After all, it was only an increase in willpower that could not bring about any improvement in strength. However, once there was an opportunity to sharpen one's willpower, no one would be willing to give it up. After all, the benefits of sharpening one's willpower could be said to be endless. In the early stages of the path, aptitude occupied a large part of it. However, once one reached the level of a deity, if one wanted to make further progress, it would not just be a matter of aptitude. After all, any existence that could become a deity was a genius that shocked the entire Federation and even the entire galaxy. Their aptitudes were about the same, and even the resources they received were not too different. However, the realm that they could reach in the end was different. The main reason for this was that they did not have true perseverance and the strongest willpower to truly reach the peak. This would determine the extent of their future development. Lu Feng already understood now. This ancient altar, the final place of worship of the ancient civilization, also had the function of sharpening one's willpower. This, to him, was really a little unexpected. Or perhaps this final place of worship was simply used to sharpen one's willpower. The aura of desolation on it is simply smelting a kind of endless and eternal glory, a kind of past to the era and civilization. Or perhaps it could be said that it could be created by the ancient Feng clan. This was specially created to sharpen those geniuses of the ancient Feng clan. However, even so, what can I do? Whether it was deliberately arranged or unconsciously released, what difference does it make to me? What I want is the peak. I want to reach the peak of this altar. Therefore, no matter what it is, as long as it does not cause me to die immediately, I will not stop my footsteps. This time, I will bet my future hope. To be honest, there were three main reasons why he wanted to reach the altar. First, he wanted to see what was buried in this final place of worship of the ancient civilization. Firstly, he wanted to hone his willpower. Lastly, he wanted to take a look at the terrifying crack and see what it was. From here, he could not see anything at all. After all, this crack was really big. Moreover, it was impossible to look at it directly from a close distance. After all, one had to pass through this ancient altar on the way to the crack. If he wanted to see the full picture of the crack, he had to pass through it. This was also one of the reasons why Lu Feng wanted to reach the altar in the beginning. However, at this moment, when Lu Feng was suppressed by this endless pressure, the unyielding madness in his heart was completely ignited. He had forgotten his own goal. All he had was the final peak. Perhaps those who know will say that I am stupid and ignorant. Even so, what can I do? I, Lu Feng, am the one and only Lu Feng in the entire universe. My decision is my path. For this reason, even if I have to be willful, even if I go crazy for once, so what? Chapter 60. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a hint of unyieldingness and madness. He knew that, regardless of the reason, he had to go up. This wasn't just a test to the altar. It was also Lu Feng's reproach for his own soul. If he couldn't cross this threshold, then he wouldn't just lose an opportunity. He would lose his future hope and path. It could be said that Lu Feng had made the most irrational decision under the madness of his soul. However, it was also a decision that belonged solely to him. He had already casually gambled his fate on this trial. This was the real Lu Feng. Back then, he had clearly known that he didn't have the slightest talent for cultivation, yet he had still persevered for 7 years. Even though he hadn't been able to condense even half a star's power, he hadn't given up. He had still trained frantically. This was Lu Feng's stubbornness and insanity. Without insanity, how could one have a sharp edge? Without a sharp edge, how could one be called Lu Feng? Before he knew it, Lu Feng had already walked up more than 100 steps. Thanks to the continuous tempering, he had become more and more accustomed to the desolate aura's pressure. Although the pressure on each step was constantly increasing, the extent of the increase couldn't be compared to Lu Feng's adaptation. After a long time, Lu Feng had already walked up more than 1,000 steps. At this point, Lu Feng's every step was extremely heavy, yet he was also extremely determined. He didn't know when it started, but the desolate aura seemed to be getting denser and denser, making his steps heavier and heavier. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng had never given up. Therefore, he was persistent, tenacious, and strong. When he raised his head and looked at the boundless peak, Lu Feng took a deep breath and stopped for the time being. Bloodlines are indeed a very peculiar and great thing. It's no wonder that those divine descendants are superior. Their starting point is already far beyond that of ordinary people. I've already spent nearly a day climbing these thousands of stairs. I can feel that under the boiling of my bloodline, I don't seem to have consumed any energy at all. If it was during normal times, even though he could survive without eating or drinking for a few days, he would still feel a kind of hunger and thirst. But now, with his blood boiling, Lu Feng felt that he was still at the peak. As long as my body can take it, I will keep going. I must reach the final destination. After resting for a while, Lu Feng finally started climbing again. Unknowingly, another day had passed. At this time, Lu Feng had already walked past the 2,000th step. At this time, he was already sweating profusely. Every step he took was incomparably heavy. Starting from 2,000, it was another powerful increase, and another pressure was weighing down on him. The intensity of the desolate aura made it difficult for him to move. However, this kind of pressure did not make Lu Feng have the slightest intention of giving up. All the trials and tribulations had instead aroused his fighting spirit. Flames of madness began to burn in his eyes. He knew that this was another barrier of his willpower. If he continued to walk, there would be a moment when he could relax. If he retreated now, he would probably stop here for the rest of his life. And it was only now that Lu Feng understood that this path of training his willpower could be called a path of no return. If he retreated, it would leave a shadow in his heart. If he wanted to improve in the future, it would be extremely limited. The only way was to keep climbing. As long as he transcended everything, as long as he walked to the final destination, he would be able to break the shackles of his heart. He would then have enough courage and willpower to face any difficulties. In 2 days, I've already walked past the 2,000th step. If this goes on, my speed might slow down later. But I still have to continue. In comparison, the Federal University's entrance ceremony is not that important, although he might miss the Federal University's opening ceremony and might even delay his enrollment for Lu Feng Lai. It was all worth it. After all, the Federal University's courses, other than the necessary cultural classes, were only available to specially enrolled students like him. And as a psychic, what Lu Feng had to learn his first year was only some simple mechanical operations. Among them, there would not even be the theory of using spiritual power to split. For Lu Feng Lai, these are not essential. Therefore, even if he missed the opening ceremony, Lu Feng did not feel that it was a big deal. No matter what, I have to continue walking on this path. Once I fail, then no matter how heaven-defying I am, I will only be a god. For me, this is not enough. Not enough. If it was in the past, then for Lu Feng Lai, becoming a god was already a dream that he did not even dare to think about. Back then, he only wanted to become a beginner warrior. But when Lu Feng opened his mind space and obtained his own treasures, he already understood that being a warrior was no longer something that he could only hope for. However, when he saw the countless geniuses and felt their incomparable nobility, Lu Feng secretly swore that he would definitely strive for the realm of a god in this life. In the end, when the bloodline that belonged to him awakened, Lu Feng understood that he had completely transformed. He did not lose to any peerless geniuses. In fact, he was even nobler and greater than them. He wanted to shatter the shackles of fate. His goal was not to make people feel pain and regret, nor was it to become an existence that others admired. What he wanted was the true peak, the strongest peak that nothing could restrain. He wanted to shatter the shackles of fate. He wanted to shatter all obstacles. Therefore, how could being a god be enough? How could it be? On this path, there was no turning back. If he wanted to walk to the end, to walk to the peak. Finally, Lu Feng once again set foot on the journey. A total of 11 days had passed. In these 11 days, Lu Feng had walked until he was completely exhausted, until his mind was weak. However, he never took a step back. Even before the 9,000 checkpoint, he still had no intention of stopping. Strong, this was an absolute strength. His belief was firm, and after these 11 days of continuous tempering, Lu Feng felt that his willpower had also become incomparably tough. At this moment, even if he faced those disasters, he was confident that he could overcome them and surpass them. During these 11 days of travel, Lu Feng was constantly undergoing the baptism of endless desolation. These auras made him feel a kind of loneliness between heaven and earth, a kind of endless sadness. Unknowingly, his heart was also slowly transforming. It was transforming towards a realm that only the strong could achieve. At this moment, even if those geniuses appeared again, they would not make him feel the slightest bit of excitement. This was not only because of the increase in aptitude brought about by the appearance of the bloodline, but also because the endless tempering had enlightened his soul. 9,999. One more step, and I will enter the 10,000th rank. I'm afraid that this will be the most difficult checkpoint since I climbed this ancient altar. However, none of this can stop me, and none of this can make me compromise at all. In the end, I still have to walk up. Looking up, Lu Feng could faintly see the altar at the top. His heart was also burning with passion. When he looked up from below, Lu Feng felt that this altar was incomparably tall, and he could barely see the top. But now he was about to reach the 10,000th rank. In front of him, he could even see a ray of light at the top. This kind of progress was completed unknowingly. Everything was achieved through his hard work. Therefore, he was confident that he would be able to reach the peak of the world. The 10,000th I am coming, looking at everything around him, looking at everything in front of him. Lu Feng was at a loss, and he was in a daze. He still remembered clearly that when he took the last step, an incomparably terrifying aura of desolation washed over him, causing him to almost lose himself. It was also at this moment that he ignited his endless madness and finally steadily walked up the 10,000-step staircase. However, just as he was about to relax, everything changed completely. Lu Feng felt the pressure on his body, the terrifying aura of desolation around him, and the ancient altar had all disappeared. Everything had strangely disappeared and completely ceased to exist. Suddenly, Lu Feng was shocked to discover that he was no longer the same person he used to be. Perhaps he was only a mid-level warrior, and this kind of strength was really nothing in the entire Federation's warrior system. However, he was still an existence that far surpassed ordinary people. He was an existence that only appeared in a few thousand people. However, at this moment, the strength that he was so proud of was already in his body. His body was so frail, so weak, so small. Stretching out his arms and looking at his tender hands, Lu Feng couldn't believe that this was himself. However, the feeling that came from the depths of his soul made him believe that this was Lu Feng. This was his own body. What the hell is going on? He looked at his surroundings in shock and confusion. Gradually, all of his memories began to fade away. In the forest, the sun shone through and dyed the ground green. The flowers were tender and beautiful, but everything was so out of place. Because it was the height of spring, but a young child was sitting on a big rock, crying helplessly. His name was Lu Feng, and he was the son of a villager. Since he was young, he had lived in the turmoil of war. Although he had never experienced the sorrow of being homeless and destitute, his life had been very difficult. For as long as he could remember, he hadn't eaten a full meal, and he hadn't enjoyed a happy childhood. However, that difficult past was so worth remembering for the current him. It was so happy for him. Chapter 61. Countless tears streamed down his face. wetting the limestone he was sitting on. After crying for a long time, Lu Feng seemed to be tired. He raised his head and looked at the bright and beautiful sky. His eyes were filled with a maturity that did not match his age. When he thought of how his parents had died under the cavalry for him, countless tears streamed down his face. In this life, I must accomplish great things and fulfill my parents' last hope. In a daze, Lu Feng seemed to recall the countless times his parents had lovingly hugged him and repeatedly said those words. Our Feng is destined to do great things. In the future, when you do great things, when others see us, they will say, look, that's Lu Feng's parents. His child has done great things. Tightly clenching his fists, young Lu Feng's eyes once again flashed with a trace of determination. Finally, that feeling of exhaustion caused him to fall into a deep sleep. Gradually, Lu Feng grew up with the help of the villagers. Later, he left the village for a full 5 years. When he returned 5 years later, many of the villagers did not recognize him anymore. However, in the remaining years, he worked hard and was willing to help others, gaining the goodwill of the villagers. Gradually, he got married and married a beautiful girl from a neighboring village. The man worked in the fields while the woman assisted her husband and taught the children. Their lives were carefree. Gradually, Lu Feng had children, and because of the unification of the world, life was gradually getting better. The children played happily every day. Lu Feng looked at them kindly, just like his parents did in the past. The days passed by just like that. Lu Feng seemed to have forgotten the hope of his childhood. He had forgotten the vow he had secretly made. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. The current emperor was old and gradually could not manage the imperial court. Moreover, the candidate for the crown prince had not been decided for a long time. There were only 2 princes in the current celestial empire. The first prince was kind-hearted and diligent in governance and loved the people. The second prince, on the other hand, was an ambitious and ruthless person. Originally, according to the opinions of many officials, the first prince was the most suitable candidate for the throne. However, the current emperor seemed to favor the second prince and even had the intention of making him the crown prince. If not for the obstruction of many officials, the throne would have been decided. The 2 princes began to fight both openly and covertly. Unfortunately, the second prince had conquered many places and enjoyed endless glory and power in the military. In the entire celestial empire, apart from the current emperor, no one else could take away his enormous military power. The first prince suffered setbacks everywhere, and the battle between the 2 continued to escalate. Bastard! You're all bastards. Let my mother go, let my mother go. Scram! Whoosh! His sword was unsheathed, and his young face froze, filled with terror and fear. Father! They killed Big Brother! They killed Big Brother! Little brats, so annoying. Blood splattered again, and yet another young figure disappeared, withering away. Father! Save me! Save me! Clang! Blood's blood! I'll kill you all! Lu Feng went berserk and charged towards those officers with all his might. However, he was unarmed and heavily injured, and he could not defeat those powerful officers. In the end, he collapsed in a pool of blood. He looked at his dead wife and son, and at the ashes of his house. There was a trace of regret and despair in his eyes. He could still vaguely remember the words that the emperor had said to him in the midst of the chaos when he was young. Good, I like you, child. Follow me, and you'll be my adopted son. In the future, you'll have a share of this world. At that time, he was hot-blooded and heroic. However, after countless life-and-death experiences, he gradually became afraid. The closer he was to death, the more he feared death. On the night before the decisive battle, his adoptive father had given him a difficult task. If he succeeded, his name would go down in history, and he would be a loyal official who founded the country. If he failed, he would be reduced to ashes and bones. However, at this important moment, he retreated. He actually became a deserter. The divine army was defeated. The divine army took advantage of the victory, and after the battle, the country was settled. No one knew that the outcome of this epic battle would be decided by only one person. Lu Feng's eyes were already closed after a long time. Lu Feng gradually woke up. He realized that he was not dead. It was just that his body had suffered injuries that were difficult to heal. Looking at the completely ruined village, Lu Feng's eyes had lost all light. Dragging his battered body, he found some medicinal herbs and slowly treated his injuries. He was the only one left in the once peaceful village. Lu Feng was still alive. He was only alive now. On this day, heavy rain poured down, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. The entire village was shaken by the terrifying lightning. Lu Feng sat on the boat, his eyes still lifeless and lifeless. However, at night, the sound of countless soldiers fighting came from outside the door. After a long time, the sound gradually stopped. At this moment, his door was opened. There were two people. One of them was covered in blood. Lu Feng could feel that he would not live for long. The other was old and seemed to have suffered from the shock just now. He was on the verge of death. They looked at Lu Feng and finally sighed deeply. "Give this to the second prince. You will receive a lifetime of glory and wealth. Remember, you have to give it to the second prince personally." The old man trembled and finally fell to the ground. The bodyguard struggled to take out a roll of silk from his bosom and handed it to Lu Feng. Faced with this, Lu Feng's eyes finally flashed with a trace of emotion. He took the scroll in his hand and looked at the lifeless bodyguard. At this moment, he suddenly laughed. He still remembered clearly, even though he was old and clumsy and was no longer as majestic as before. However, Lu Feng still remembered it clearly. He could have today's status because of him, Lu Feng. Who would have thought that fate would arrange it like this? At his last moment, he actually had to rely on him, Lu Feng, to let this vast country produce a new monarch. Taking the scroll, Lu Feng recognized that it was an imperial edict. On it, there was still some ink that had not yet dried, and there was a bright red mark. Finally, Lu Feng walked out of the door. At this moment, he suddenly laughed wildly, laughing so crazily. "The promise from my childhood. I remember. Father, mother, your son's promise. I remember. I, Lu Feng, remember." On the altar, Lu Feng's body was almost illusory. Countless desolate auras lingered and had already begun to invade Lu Feng's body. His life fluctuations became weaker and weaker, as if the flame of life would be extinguished in the next moment. However, at this moment, a shadow appeared behind Lu Feng. It was a pagoda, an indescribably huge and indescribable heaven reaching Futu. It only had one level, a towering peak that was forever hidden in endless haze, and nothing could be seen. Heaven reaching Futu. That was the incomparably mysterious heaven reaching Futu in Lu Feng's mind space. Now, at the moment when Lu Feng's life was about to wither away, it actually appeared. The appearance of heaven reaching Futu was a kind of power that surpassed any words. Power was limitless and began to emanate. In an instant, the entire ancient altar began to tremble. And it was also at this moment that the three peerless martial art avatars that the Divine King of the universe had condensed with all his strength actually all woke up. Endless majesty also soared into the sky. In this quasi-perfect world, it constantly emanated a kind of extreme majesty. Just a trace of this kind of power, this kind of majesty, was enough to make the entire planet tremble, and it was enough to obliterate any godly great beings. However, at this moment, the martial art avatars of the three great Divine King of the universe were actually unable to shake heaven reaching Futu in the slightest. Lu Feng's body had already begun to wither, and the aura of desolation had invaded his body as he walked to the brink of death. However, the appearance of heaven reaching Futu seemed to be Lu Feng's most powerful protection. It constantly condensed countless auras that surpassed any other kind of aura and began to inject them into Lu Feng's body, causing him to actually gradually recover. The three peerless martial art avatars of the divine king of the universe finally began to retreat under the powerful majesty. In the end, they lost the feeling of recovery, and the matchless majesty disappeared, returning to tranquility once again. In that illusory world, 3 days gradually passed. And in these 3 days, Lu Feng had experienced too much. From a moment he left home until now, Lu Feng knew that he had already fallen into the dispute of the dynasty's throne. One after another, countless people had already come to hunt him down. Lu Feng also understood that once he was found by any group of people, he would definitely end up dead. If it was before, so be it if he died. But now, he couldn't die. He still had one last thing to do. He still had to fulfill the promise of the past. How could he die? With the help of the experiences he had when he was young, Lu Feng was finally able to evade countless pursuers. However, Lu Feng also knew that he didn't have long to live. These days, he had suffered countless injuries, and his body, which had never fully recovered, had already reached its limit. If it wasn't for the last bit of faith in his heart, he would have died long ago. Finally, after using various disguises, Lu Feng still managed to sneak into the imperial city. The reason why he had risked his life to come here, apart from the fact that he didn't have much time left, was more because today was his last chance. Today was the 3rd day after the assassination of the current emperor. It was also the day of worship and the day of the election of a new emperor. Therefore, Lu Feng had to come here today. This was his only chance, and also his last chance. After entering the city, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and directly rushed to the final place of worship. At this moment, there was already a sea of people there. Countless people were dressed in mourning clothes, sobbing, real or fake. As for Lu Feng, he was the only one left standing. Chapter 62. Gradually, some people noticed Lu Feng and wanted to reprimand him. But at this moment, Lu Feng took out the posthumous edict left behind by the deceased emperor. The emperor's posthumous edict is here. Everyone listen. This voice shocked everyone. The thousands of subjects were stunned, not knowing what to do. Lu Feng held the imperial edict high and walked step by step towards the summit. The two princes knelt in front of everyone. They raised their heads slightly, their eyes shining. Finally, Lu Feng walked to the summit. At this moment, he looked down on everyone, his eyes cold. The corners of his mouth curved upwards, but no one could see it. Suddenly, he opened the imperial edict. But at this moment, an arrow flew out of nowhere and directly pierced Lu Feng's body. Blood splattered everywhere. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the two princes stood up, wanting to fight for the supreme edict that concerned the fate of the dynasty. But at the last moment, Lu Feng forced himself to stand in place. His eyes were shining with a brilliance that had never been seen before. It seemed to be able to see through everything, to compete with the brilliance of the sun and moon. A loud shout suppressed the two princes and everyone else who was about to make a move. In the next moment, Lu Feng opened the imperial edict and used the loudest voice he had ever used in his life to make a sudden announcement. The emperor's throne will be passed on. First Prince, Qinglong. At the last moment, Lu Feng finally fell. The imperial edict in his hand was stained with blood. The once striking second prince had gradually disappeared, and not a single word could be seen. And no one around him paid any attention to him. No matter who became the emperor, it was expected. But when this moment really arrived, it still caused endless chaos. No one saw Lu Feng's strange eyes in the pool of blood. "My child, my wife, I've finally avenged you, so I never forgot the promise I made." Gradually, his body began to turn cold. Finally, the flame of life was completely extinguished. Beside Lu Feng, countless people were excitedly arguing about something. In the distance, the large word foundation above the previous emperor's coffin was so striking, so solemn, and so ironic. No one paid attention to Lu Feng anymore. No one knew that this simple and lowly ant in everyone's eyes had changed history twice, changing the direction of the world. Standing in the same place, everything around him was still the same. But Lu Feng's eyes seemed to have experienced endless vicissitudes of life. He stretched out his hand, looking at the arm full of vitality, and felt the powerful strength within. Finally, a smile crept onto his face. So, everything was an illusion. A test, this is a test. In the end, at the end of my life, I made up my mind and found the promise I made in the past. My will, in the end, to return to its original position. In the end, I did not to lose. Lu Feng had already understood. He knew that everything he had experienced was a test. Although he didn't know the consequences of losing his way, Lu Feng believed that if he didn't find the path he had set in the past, he wouldn't be able to find any path in the end. Fortunately, he had walked over in the end and returned to the top of the staircase. Lu Feng raised his hand and looked at the time on the Sky Network. A strange look flashed across his eyes. In that illusion, he had already experienced a lifetime. However, in reality, less than an hour had passed. All of this really felt like a dream. Zhuang Sheng dreamed of a butterfly, or perhaps a butterfly dreamed of a Zhuang Sheng. At this moment, Lu Feng had such an illusion. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the staircase after 10,000 steps. He took a deep breath. Previously, when he had reached the 10,000th step, he had already felt that he had reached his limit. However, now that he had woken up from this test, Lu Feng suddenly felt that the so-called pressure and staircase he had experienced before were really nothing. Finally, he took another step. Compared to the path before, it was much, much easier. Lu Feng resumed his previous speed of climbing 1,000 steps a day, and this speed was maintained by him all the way. In the blink of an eye, another 11 days had passed. This time, Lu Feng finally reached the second checkpoint. At this moment, although he was much better than when he had reached the 10,000th step, however, he was also extremely tired. He looked at the staircase that he still couldn't see the top of. Lu Feng smiled slightly and then walked into it again. Feeling that he had once again become a child, Lu Feng did not feel the slightest bit of shock this time. He seemed to have grasped something. Therefore, Lu Feng had become able to accept the change in the scene in front of him. Was it this time? Lu Feng lived in a poor family. However, unlike those common villagers, his father was a man of true learning. Since he was a child, his requirements for Lu Feng had been unusually strict. Lu Feng also lived up to his father's expectations. Although he was young, he had already performed exceptionally well. He was known far and wide as a little prodigy. Since he was a child, Lu Feng had been influenced by his father and was determined to be a good official who served the people. In addition to the necessary knowledge, he also dabbled in the history of both ancient and modern times. Finally, Lu Feng, who had performed extraordinarily at a young age, began to become famous. Almost the entire county had his legend. This year, the emperor happened to come to the county where Lu Feng lived when he went south to play. Hearing the name of the prodigy, the emperor was surprised to see Lu Feng. This year, Lu Feng was already 10 years old. Since he was a child, he had been more intelligent than ordinary people and had a photographic memory. In addition, he had read a lot of books and poems and was well-versed in both ancient and modern times. As soon as they met, the emperor fell deeply in love with this child who was more ambitious than the heavens. When the emperor returned to the capital, he personally issued a decree to allow Lu Feng to participate in the examination the next year. Lu Feng did not disappoint. He performed well and directly entered the court examination. Although he did not become the top scorer, his name spread throughout the dynasty. That year, Lu Feng was 11 years old. Time passed by slowly. Year after year, Lu Feng finally reached the end of the palace examinations. In the past, he had participated in the court examination every year. However, the ambitious Lu Feng did not stop until he became the top scorer. When the emperor was pleased with his ambition, he actually allowed him to do so. This year, Lu Feng came to the court examination for the last time. This time, he finally got what he wanted. He became the unparalleled top scorer of the year. This year, Lu Feng was 15 years old. As the years passed, Lu Feng gradually grew up. As his reputation spread, everyone in the imperial court knew of his prodigy name. The current emperor entrusted him with an important task, letting him govern a region. Lu Feng never forgot his childhood ambition. He always followed the example of the ancient sages and worked hard to govern. He turned the barren hills and turbulent rivers into a place with clear water and great rivers, and his name spread for a time. This year, Lu Feng was 19 years old. After 4 years of governance, his achievements were obvious. The emperor was pleased. He stood his ground and summoned Lu Feng to the court to serve. Lu Feng did not disappoint the emperor. He was cautious and conscientious. He was strict with himself at all times and managed his affairs well. The voices of discussion in and out of the court disappeared. This year, Lu Feng was 24 years old. Lu Feng obtained the recognition of the entire nation. From then on, he skyrocketed, shattering countless age restrictions and beginning his path to the imperial court. This year, Lu Feng was 27 years old. The emperor was old and no longer cared about governance. He delegated Lu Feng to a high official to govern a province. That year, Lu Feng got married. Glory and splendor reigned supreme. Lu Feng continued to serve the people and earned the name Clear Heaven. However, it was during this time that he used his authority to help his wife's children. This year, Lu Feng was 33 years old. The old emperor was anxious and summoned Lu Feng back to the court as a high official. The second time, Lu Feng used his authority to buy a mansion for himself. It was during this period that Lu Feng learned how to bully those at the top and hide from those at the bottom. This year, Lu Feng was 40 years old. The emperor passed away, and a new emperor ascended the throne. He ruled the world and became the new ruler. The new emperor obeyed the late emperor's orders and delegated the power of the court to Lu Feng. From then on, Lu Feng took the position of prime minister for the first time. For a period of time, his glory was limitless, and he had a great reputation. This time, Lu Feng felt that he was getting older. He started to guide the younger generation of countless families, disregarding their talents and appointing people based on their connections. This year, Lu Feng was 49 years old. The new emperor had a weak body. He worked hard, but did not have a strong body. Not long after taking the throne, he fell ill and delegated power to Lu Feng. From then on, Lu Feng began his life of ruling the court alone. During these 3 years, Lu Feng controlled the imperial examinations, purged his political enemies, and took control of the military. For a period of time, he actually had the title of Half-Emperor Lu. Everyone in the court acted according to Lu Feng's expression. This year, Lu Feng was 57 years old. The emperor passed away, and 3 new emperors ascended the throne. The new emperor was young, and Lu Feng had complete control of the court. For a period of time, he could do whatever he wanted. During these years, the barbarian race had invaded, and the people had no way of making a living. Unfortunately, Lu Feng did not take any action. For a period of time, the people were filled with resentment. This year, Lu Feng was 67 years old. There was a drought, and starving people were everywhere. To protect his own interests, Lu Feng ignored the lives of the people. This year, countless people prayed for Lu Feng to wake up. This year, Lu Feng was 69 years old. Floods spread, and the people had no way of making a living. Bandits ran rampant, and uprisings were everywhere. No one trusted Lu Feng, and his reputation was terrible. He was despised by the people. This year, Lu Feng was 72 years old. The dynasty was weak, and the barbarian race was strong. They burned, killed, and pillaged, committing all sorts of crimes. Lu Feng started to organize a counterattack, but it had little effect. This year, Lu Feng was 74 years old. For the sake of righteousness, even if he died, he would not regret it. The uprisings stopped, and numerous volunteer armies formed to resist the barbarian race. However, there were many casualties. Lu Feng was old, but due to his strong control, he still controlled the court. This year, Lu Feng was 75 years old. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.